Business, Matters of Privilege and Recognition of Guests, the Honourable Premier.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Welcome back to all of my colleagues for another day of important debate in the Legislative Assembly. All of those tuned in at home, of course. Mr. Speaker, I want to make mention of 4 Islanders who were named to the training squad for Team Canada for the Special Olympics World Winter Games to be held with great hope in 2022 in Kazan, Russia. Charity Sheehan is the chef de mission for the national squad. Jordan Keown is competing in speed skating. Christy Jo Snyder's coachman in snowshoeing. And Craig Watson is a staff member with the snowshoe team, Mr. Speaker. So right now they're meeting virtually. Athletes are training underway, and the final teams will be announced later on this year. So good news and a good ray of hope in that regard. I also wanted to recognize, Mr. Speaker, that the West Point Lighthouse is undergoing some changes and in recognition of its 150th birthday. I had the privilege to stay a couple of nights there this summer, Mr. Speaker. It was a great couple of days off the grid for me, and appreciate it very much. I had the opportunity to listen to a gentleman named Old Fred tell some terrific stories, Mr. Speaker, and as a storyteller, I was in awe of his great memory and recall and just how informed and entertaining that was. Also, recently through the winter, at the request of the member from O'Leary Inverness, who went up there and met with the Development Corporation to talk about their plans for expansion, which we're very happy to assist with. And I was, we joked, only half jokingly, Mr. Speaker, that we thought we were going to have to bring the plows in to take the sand off the road up there. The roads were so wonderfully sanded up there, and a lot of compliments for the government up there, Mr. Speaker. They thought the government had given up sand up there over the years, but now they're great to know that they've given it back, Mr. Speaker. There's lots of it up there now, and but no, exciting. They're looking at expanding with cabins and other developments up there, Mr. Speaker, so good for them. I also want to recognize Nancy Orr, Mr. Speaker, known to most people as a provincial court judge, known better to me, thankfully, as a UPEI hockey fan and booster, Mr. Speaker, but also a tremendous advocate for 4-H, and she was recognized with a 4-H Trust Award and also recognized with a lifetime honorary membership at 4-H Canada, Mr. Speaker, so very well deserved for her. And I just want to finish off by picking up on a comment made yesterday by the member from Charlottetown Victoria Park who talked about her trip to the Surrey Line Road and then the Surrey Strider Ski Park. And of course there's a story today on the CBC website about how well they're doing, Mr. Speaker, and that brought back a lot of good memories for me. As you know, in a former life when I was quite young, I was a reporter at the Eastern Graphic, and the community of Surrey and Eastern Kings was part of my my coverage, Mr. Speaker. That's where you and I first became acquainted, I would say, and we won't share that story of how that first happened here today. But along the way, I did very early on, when the ski park was just getting started, Brian DeVoe and Freddie Chevrolet and so many others would call me up there to cover events that they were having and to promote the ski park. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I was overwhelmed to read the story and to see how much it has expanded and how well it has done. And I think it's just a classic example of community partnership and working together, which, as you know better than most, is really just the foundation of Eastern Kings in general. So just wanted to say thanks to the honourable member for rekindling that memory for me, and to continued good luck to those at the Surrey Striders Ski Club. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to one day hearing that story, Premier. And for the record, you still, at least from this perspective, you still look pretty young to me, sitting over there. One of the things I miss about the old setup in this room was being able to recognize guests that would be sitting over there in the gallery. And of course, we can't do that. We haven't been able to do that for over a year now. But I do know that a resident of District 17 watches faithfully every day, and many in this house will know him, Lorne Yeo, who used to be a reporter for The Guardian, of course. And Lorne lives in District 17, and he's a great fella. Never slows down, always on the go. In fact, he dropped a letter off for me at the desk here this morning, full of advice, of course. I don't always follow his advice, but he's always happy to come forward with that. And I wanted to say hi to you, Lauren. I hope you're watching today. I know that it seems from your letters you watch every minute of every day, so I hope you're picking this up, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for everybody who tunes in, of course, not just from District 17, but all across the island. The Atlantic Business Magazine just announced their 25 most powerful women in Atlantic Canada, and there are 3 island women who made that list. Janine Woolridge is one. Now, Janine is the executive director of Ulnue, a fairly new organization, been on the go for a couple of years now. And I've got to know Janine over the last couple of years, incredibly impressive young woman who is really moving that organization in a very powerful direction. And she's helping to guide the First Nations on Prince Edward Island here to a healthy and a successful future. So I wish her well. The second powerful woman in Atlantic Canada who was recognized was Dr. Heather Morrison. Of course, she doesn't require any introduction at all, just our ongoing gratitude and congratulations to you, Heather. And the third is Mary Robinson. Mary is a 6th-generation farmer, part of a 6th-generation family farm here on Prince Edward Island. And she was also the first woman president ever of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture that represents about 200,000 farms across the country here, and of course advocates for agriculture both domestically and around the world. So congratulations to Mary. She was just recently installed for a 2nd term as the president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and good on you. 3 extraordinary women here on Prince Edward Island, and again on the list of 25 powerful women in Atlantic Canada, I would say across Canada. The MacPhail Ecological Woods just released their online nursery catalogue. Now, if you're looking for planting ideas or native trees here, and well, other things as well, but they're absolutely known for propagating native trees at the site there down in MacPhail Woods. And a wonderful facility, well worth a visit. And if you want to stock up on seeds and shrubs and ferns and wildflowers, then check out their nursery online. It's well worth it. Also, we're approaching tax season, and if you're an islander with a modest income and a simple tax return, there are volunteers who will help you. They offer free tax clinics for people with those simple tax returns, and they're at the Murphy's Community Centre across the road here, and also many public libraries across PEI, and they're there to assist islanders with, again, simple, modest tax returns. So if you need help, please look them up online, because it's a really wonderful resource for so many islanders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as we say many times when we rise, it's certainly a pleasure, and we all mean that in here, because we're here to represent our fellow constituents in each district here in the province and do people's business here. On my way down this morning, Mr. Speaker, it certainly felt like spring was in the horizon, with the warm sun beating through the windows, and as you can see outside today, it's a beautiful, beautiful day. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to congratulate the team that's going to the Special Olympic Winter Games, and wish them all the best in their games. And also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw attention to UPEI's annual career fair, which is going on today. And as part of the events, as with many events in the last year, UPEI had to adapt to COVID-19 restrictions, and for that reason, the fair will be held virtually this year. The fair will see a series of video presentations shared on social media platforms, which will later be placed on the university's career fair webpage. 2 video sessions have already occurred, one at 10 a.m. and one at noon, and the third will begin at 2 p.m. this afternoon. This fair gives the students and potential employers a great opportunity to connect with one another and foster future professional relationships and connections. I am pleased to see it proceed this year despite challenges posed by COVID-19. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't often get up to do greetings in the House, so I want to take the opportunity to welcome everybody who's following along at home, particularly my mother, who watches every day. And as I understand, the mother of the member from Summerside Wilmot watches every day, so I'll also say hello to her mother. As we were having a discussion about the 26 people who were tuned in to watch the debate the other day, we determined that 2 of them were our mothers, so that there's 24 others that were watching at that particular time. So, and I also know my mother is watching without checking the numbers, because she always sends me a text after question period, and her opinion of how I did is much different than what you may read in the letters to the editor. Which it should be, which it should be. Speaking of letters to the editor, I don't often, if ever, pay attention to the types of things that are in there. I believe that everybody's welcome to their opinion, and everybody's welcome to be wrong whenever they like to be, and I'm okay with that. I took a particular concern to the letter of the editor to the editor today that spoke about the member from Montague Kilmuir, and that the position was that I was bullying him. So I want to address that for a minute, and I'm going to address it on a couple levels. Number one, the member from Montague Kilmuir is a very good friend of mine. He has been for a very, very long time. He's one of the people who I call more than my mother, so I talk to him on the phone more than I talk to my mom on the phone. He's somebody who I trust for advice. He's somebody who I've known for a long time, and have known his family for a long time. I mentioned in the legislature the other day, we coached a hockey team together when he was 14. I didn't really tell the full truth. He was the coach. I was the assistant coach when he was 14 years old. So there is no power struggle between myself and my good friend over there. We are, as everyone else in this house, we are equals in this house. And it discourages me when the word bully is used when we talk about members of the Legislative Assembly and the interactions in here, because we are all equals. There's people who are really being bullied. There's children who can't sleep at night. There's children who cry going to school. There's children who cry coming home from school because of the way that they're being treated. It's been an ongoing issue. It's been happening since I was a child. I remember sleepless nights that I had when I was a child. What happened between me and my good friend over there is far from bullying, and perhaps there's another. I get it, you don't like me, that's great. It doesn't bother me a bit that you don't like me. It doesn't bother me a bit that you don't like the things that I say or the way that I say them. I'm perfectly okay with that. There has to be a better word for that. Just say you don't like me, or you don't like my approach, or you don't like the way I talk, or you don't like how aggressive I am. When you use the word bullying, it completely diminishes the people who are really being bullied. And I think that obviously the lady who wrote the letter was angry, and I accept your anger. I absolutely accept your anger. But I think it's high time that when we look at bullying, we place it properly. My good friend and everyone in here is my equal, and I treat you as my equal. And if I come back at you hard, it's because I believe you're my equal and you can handle it. If I thought you weren't, I wouldn't do that. And I think that's something that everyone in here should accept, not just from me, but that there is a whole other culture out there that isn't like the privilege that we have in here, that people don't get the privilege that we have in here, and there's people out there that are really dealing with bullies. So this might be the last time I ever respond to a letter from the editor, save that there's 100 of them show up here in the next week or so. I'm not going to make it a habit, so you can write your response letter if you like, but I'm not going to respond to it. So I just want to set the record straight that about my good friend, my longtime trusted friend, a person who has worked with me, and I want to also note that when people who are involved politically with me work with me, not for me. There's not a single person in the department that I represent who I consider as an employee who works for me. Every single person there works with me towards the goals of government, and that's the way it should be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a beautiful day today. Just a good afternoon to my colleagues and everyone watching from Charlottetown, Victoria Park. I needed to get up this afternoon and give a shout out to the 4th Toronto Girl Guides group. I was the pleasure to be invited to take part in their meeting last night when they were to celebrate International Women's Day. And so we had a plan of what we might say, and then questions we would ask to spark discussion, and literally we had like 2 pages of different things and literally didn't make it past the first 2 questions. These young young women were so impressive, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, and when I speak to our youth, there's nothing that fills me with more hope than when I have an opportunity to sit and be with youth. We talked about, I need to go through this list because it's impressive, this was completely led by them. We talked about the importance of having BIPOC and LGBTQSIA voices in government. We talked about rights for people with disabilities. We talked about respecting people's pronouns, gender diversity, equal pay. We talked about anti-racism, poverty, climate action, and Indigenous issues and how they connect. And we talked about restorative justice, among other things. And I said to them last night, I would love for all of us to give up our seat for 2 days in this legislature just to see what you might come up with. And so a special thank you to all of our youth across this province and across Canada, across the world, who are making their world better simply by being a part of it and using their voice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to say hello to everybody in District 14 and say that I saw a lot of people out walking around the district today on a beautiful, beautiful day. So make sure you get out there and enjoy it. And I just want to make reference to the Guardian as well. And I don't think that people were buying the Guardian today to read the story that the Minister of Energy and Environment was referring to. I think they were buying the Guardian because we had a special resident of District 14 on the cover, and that's what sold papers today. And that's Joe D, and that's why people bought the Guardian today. He's a great resident of District 14, Zamboni driver at Simmons, and he's done an incredible amount for the community. Very happy, and obviously now he has a very handsome face, and we sold a lot of copies of the Guardian right here today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, it is a pleasure to rise here today and say hello to everyone watching the proceedings, especially out in District 10, Charlottetown, Winslow. I do want to say a special hello to Glenn and Barb. They do tune in quite regularly, so I hope you're listening today. I really appreciate it. Also, another constituent of District 10, Charlottetown, Winslow, a big job today. His name is Robbie Dougherty. A lot of people may remember Robbie from the curling rink, and a lot of people may know him also as Silly Robbie. First of all, he has been nominated for an ECMA Children's Entertainer of the Year, and he is actually taking a brand new job on with the City of Charlottetown as the Communications Coordinator. And if you do know Robbie, I think he will do very well in this position because he is an incredibly good communicator. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, third-party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to rise today, and we're coming up to tax time, and I know everybody loves their tax time, but there's a lot of people that don't do their tax filing, and legally they don't have to. But Mr. Speaker, I know when we were in government, we partnered with Canada Revenue Agency to launch the Beware Get Your Share campaign, which was designed to encourage Islanders to process their taxes and receive whatever benefits that are available to them. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the amount of money that came into this province because of that campaign, I certainly would suggest that this government lean on what we did as a government, because it is extremely important, and a lot of it's many vulnerable Islanders that really don't realize that they can access programs like the Canada Child Benefit, Canada Learning Bond, Provincial Generic Drug Program, HST, GST rebates, and programs under OAS and CPP. The Community Volunteer Income Tax Program has served a tremendous, as the honourable member of the opposition, as a tremendous asset for Islanders. And I believe there was over 200 volunteers last year, and they serviced 6,500 Islanders. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to ensure that all members encourage everyone to file their taxes no matter what their situation. And hopefully this government can do some sort of promotion on that. I know, Mr. Speaker, when I was finance minister and we were going through this, I actually met with the schools and seen if we could do anything in the schools to ensure that that message got out to those families that may not do their taxes but are missing out on literally hundreds of dollars, and our province is missing out on millions of dollars. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there anyone else that would like to say a few words? The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to welcome all the people who listen on internet, and I want in particular to congratulate my residents on the news that the Simmons Arena is going to be renewed with at least one new rink. We don't know exactly the details, but I think this is wonderful news. As you all know, the plan was to tear down and build an additional rink out at UPI. As an energy specialist, I was a little bit galled that they claimed there that it would be more efficient. And of course, there will be some efficiencies. You only need to run Zamboni for many rinks. But what they completely forgot to mention that moving the rink out there would imply thousands and thousands of trips in cars driving out there from the neighborhood to a facility that right now can be reached by walking. So it won't be more efficient to build it out there. It will be more efficient to build whatever they built right where it is. Simmons is, of course, the beating heart of the neighborhood. I say that without having any family tradition for skating, whatever, but that's what I understand and that's what I believe in. It can be reached by thousands of kids, walking distance to schools and all that. So congratulations again. I hope that the province, when it contributes, which I'm sure it will, exercise its demand that the new facility be net zero. Thank you.
Did I miss anyone? Member statement. The honourable member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke, the opposition whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada now has 4 vaccines approved. Exciting and most welcome news. Last week, this government prioritized frontline essential service workers, such as grocery clerks and servers, during phase 2 of the PEI vaccine rollout. That the epidemiology of the virus on PEI has shown these workers to be particularly vulnerable to catching and spreading COVID-19 is an issue I highlighted during a committee meeting in January, and it is great to see government acknowledge and address this need. However, there is another vulnerable group who seems to not only have been left out of the prioritization list, but who, as the rules stand currently, would not be eligible to get the vaccine at all at any phase. That is because these workers lack a PEI health card. Migrant workers, Mr. Speaker, are employed throughout our province and are essential within our primary industries of fishing and farming here on PEI. While we have been very fortunate not to see any outbreaks of COVID-19 on PEI that have been directly linked to migrant workers, we know that this population is across Canada has experienced particular hardship as a result of COVID. Migrant workers are more likely to live in close quarters and engage in essential work that cannot be done virtually, putting these workers at increased risk of catching and spreading the virus. In Ontario, for example, there have been tragic instances of COVID-19 spreading swiftly among migrant workers on farms, exposing hundreds of workers within the span of a few weeks, with some losing their lives. For migrant workers who come to this country to work and support their families, contracting COVID-19 while here not only has individual health consequences, but can cause extreme financial hardship for themselves and those they support. If we fail to allow migrant workers to access and provide coverage for the vaccine, we are not only failing these workers, but all islanders. Migrant workers are skilled and essential contributors to the success of the PEI economy. We must appreciate and value these contributions by ensuring their lives are protected and preventing the spread of COVID-19 among this vulnerable population and potentially to the rest of the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a lot of discussion about what a post-COVID recovery should look like, and I was hoping in the recent speech on the throne that it would provide islanders with what this government's vision is for our economic future. It was, after all, billed as a reset made necessary because of the pandemic. When we're talking about recovery, I think we need to think about it in the broadest sense: social, economic, and cultural recovery, to optimize the future development of our province and the well-being of the people who live here and our communities. At this point in its tenure, I had expected that government would provide us all with a compelling vision, with the values behind their chosen direction, the evidence to support the policy choices that it was making, and some targets and expected outcomes to guide us towards that vision. None of that was present. In the absence of those elements which give an administration the solid foundation, the launching pad needed for whatever policy ideas it wants to pursue, I want to ask 3 questions of this government about what they see as our economic future. Number 1, what do we want to be? Number 2, how do we want to live with each other in community? And number 3, what kind of island do we want to leave for our children? The party I represent is constantly asking these questions, and the conversations that we have inform both our work in this House and beyond. The whole world is transitioning to a post-COVID economy, and it's only beginning to come to terms with how disruptive and how transformational this pandemic has been. For too long, our economic system has led to growing inequality and increasingly poor social and environmental outcomes. I believe we can build an island economy that supports all individuals and strengthens our communities, one that meets human needs and preserves and protects the natural world. It will feature the best values of another era where community and equity were predominant, and it will marry those guiding principles to the new technologies that will support a modern and sustainable island economy. It will be an economy that values quality of life and the strength of human connections and communities above money. That is who I want us to be. That is how I want us to live together. That is how we will preserve and protect the island I want to leave to our children. We need to create an island economy that serves the needs of the people, rather than one where people work to serve the needs of the economy. It's past time for this government, who claims that it's about people, to tell islanders exactly what they mean by that phrase, and to craft a recovery that supports, in the truest and deepest sense, all of our people and their well-being. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Young people in PEI, we talk about them, but we seem to have a real challenge talking to them, with them, seeking their input, opinions, and priorities. Youth have the right to exercise authority over themselves and the decisions that impact them. I'd like to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to recognize some amazing community leaders who happen to be young. First is Robin Graham, fighting for tenant rights, mobilizing awareness around homelessness, raising major dollars, and providing a voice for young islanders who feel they are not being heard or valued in the discussion about housing in PEI. You may not know Ash Green, designer and entrepreneur, but she's a force. Ash played a formative role in the founding of Empower PEI, a non-profit online organization for island-based, underrepresented entrepreneurs, such as women, members of the BIPOC community, and the 2S LGBTQIA folks. The online community and resource space has over 1,300 members and counting. Ash is also the design genius behind Local Legends Apparel and her own design company. The UPEI Student Union is a natural space for strong leaders with priorities, projects, and passion. I'm grateful to have worked with some of these inspiring people over the past few years, including Malak Nassar, the current VP academic at UPEI-SU and advocate for international students, Emma Drake and Sweater Dabu, who not only host a podcast, but who in their time at UPEI-SU secured a pilot for open education resources and who conducted research and advocated forcefully for youth interests in affordable and accessible housing. And Taya Neighbours, who helped advance the issue of sexual violence response and prevention policies on post-secondary campuses. I'd also like to recognize UPEI alum Sarah McCachran, who has drawn attention to the needs of vulnerable communities in Charlottetown, including those with housing and mental health challenges. Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, members of the Health and Social Development Committee met Brooks Roche and Hunter Gundon. They each made passionate, clear, and convincing cases seeking support for medical equipment and treatments for chronic health conditions, conditions that they personally experience. When a presentation includes a cost-benefit analysis on how to save lives as well as money, it's quite a wake-up call. Mr. Speaker, young islanders are making a positive impact in our communities. I think everyone in this House could probably find a young leader that they should be talking to if they're not so already, Mr. Speaker. And government would benefit from having them at the table when it makes decisions. Thank you.
End of member statements. Questions. Starting a response to questions taken as notice. No? For our first question, the honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 2021 annual report of the Auditor General of Prince Edward Island included a performance audit of the PEI International Student Program. Participants of this program are children from kindergarten to high school completion. Many of these children travel halfway around the world, living with host families, strangers to them, to learn English. The Auditor General found, among many things, an absence of a strategic plan, policies, and procedures. They also found no screening, monitoring, or formal agreements of the homestays these children will be living with. Mr. Speaker, all children need to be protected no matter who they are, no matter where they are, and the findings of the Auditor General do not support that this is happening. Question to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. It is your responsibility to protect all children in our island school system. Given that your department has been aware of the Auditor General's findings prior to the tabling of this report, when did you refer this matter to the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honourable Member, for the question and such an important question. As I've said before, as I've stood up and said, the health and well-being of our students is of utmost importance, whether you're a Islander or an international student. It has to be at the forefront. Mr. Speaker, I do have a meeting set up with the Child and Youth Advocate Office next Wednesday, and I can assure this House that this item will be a priority during our discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We can only achieve well cared for seniors in long-term care facilities if the staff that look after them are also well cared for. Canada has had a long-standing history of understaffing long-term care facilities, and PEI even more so. The stories I've heard from constituents and families clearly demonstrates that staff are struggling. They are overworked and they cannot keep up with the demands of a very difficult job. This leads to a high turnover of staff members and grave concerns for our seniors living in long-term care. Question to the Minister of Health and Wellness. What are the staffing levels at public and private homes on Prince Edward Island, and what are you doing to increase that level?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll take that question under notice, Mr. Speaker, and bring back the exact numbers. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, I spoke with a couple of family members who have watched an elderly relative decline while in long-term care here on PEI. They are frustrated and they're exhausted at, amongst other things, the level of care their relative is getting and the lack of information that they are receiving from the long-term home. The person in care has recently had a number of falls, the most recent being a very serious incident which left them with some deep lacerations and a number of contusions. None of this was properly documented, nor was the family notified. To the same minister, the regulations of the Community Care Facilities and Nursing Homes Act states, and I quote, "Every injury must be recorded immediately," and it also says this, "Next of kin must be notified of any injury immediately." If we are not documenting incidents like this or even contacting the next of kin, how are we providing the care island seniors need and deserve?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the Honourable Member for the question. It does, as obviously concerns the Honourable Member, concerns me if this was not taking place, and I would be more than happy, Mr. Speaker, to have a sidebar with the Honourable Member if he so chooses, and to provide me with the information, and I assure the Honourable Member that I would have it followed up on immediately looked into and contact made with the family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Speaker. The family wanted to make it absolutely clear that they have the greatest respect for all the workers in that facility, and they have sympathy for the situation they find themselves in. They recognize that, as one of them put it to me on the call the other day, staff are overworked and underpaid. What we need is more staff paid decent wages. Numerous government reports, studies and commissions would absolutely concur with that statement. To the same minister, will this government mandate minimum staff to patient ratios or a minimum number of hours of personal care per resident to ensure that island seniors live out their lives with dignity and safety?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the honourable member from my speaking to the motion with regard to seniors, certainly would appreciate, and I'm sure that all members in this legislature appreciate, from my personal experience, I agree 100%. The staff at our long-term care facilities are second to none. The care that they do provide is second to none. The compassion that they provide is second to none. And I just want to, like the honourable member did, state my complete appreciation to the workers. I think as we move forward, yes, we have to look at where the gaps may be, where we can improve upon, and move onward from there, because as I had said yesterday, Mr. Speaker, there's probably no other demographic in our population that needs and that we should be providing the support to greater than our seniors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The individual I was just referring to in the long-term care home has a private room. And one day the light bulb in her bedside lamp, which is on continuously, burned out. A family member happened to be visiting that day, as they do every day, and they noticed that the bulb was blown. So she was told by a worker that no replacement was available, and she was going to have to go out and purchase one for herself, which she did. To the minister, are our nursing homes at the point where they can't even afford to replace light bulbs in residents' rooms?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, I have never, be honest, Mr. Speaker, heard anything along that line. If that is the case, I would certainly anticipate and hope that it would be a one-off case. But yes, with regard to the supplies, whether it's light bulbs, whether it's bedding, whether it's any other number of required items that are used in our long-term care facilities, Mr. Speaker, I feel as a government that we do our very best, that we do supply these, but in this I would have to hope and take that it would be a one-off, very unfortunate situation, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
And I hope so too, Minister, and I know that the family in question has already brought this to the authorities because they're so concerned and upset. And it's not, I should say, they're concerned about their family member, of course, but they're more generally concerned about this being indicative of the state of conditions in some of our long-term care facilities here, and it's a concern that, as you stated, you share with me. Seniors across Canada have borne the brunt of the impacts of COVID, and they need to come out of the other side of this as the principal beneficiaries. Elder care in Canada, and PEI is no exception to this, relies heavily on institutionalized care, with little funding going to support home care and family caregivers. At the same time, aging at home is the preference of almost all seniors. To make that happen, to make that shift happen, it must become a deliberate policy choice of government, not an afterthought. A question to the Minister of Health and Wellness. What is your department doing to meet the needs of seniors on Prince Edward Island by rebalancing that funding between home care and institutional care and providing the choices that seniors want?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for the question. Yes, it certainly is a balance, and I do agree, and as the honourable member would recall from my comments yesterday in addressing the motion, that yes, 99%, probably 100% of our seniors want to age at home, stay at home as long as they can. And that's why we do have a number of programs, initiatives. I had mentioned in my response yesterday, Mr. Speaker, that the home care program, 23.4 million expended on that last year. In our speech from the throne, there are different new initiatives with regard to our seniors. A new at-home respite program that will be looked at, new dementia team, the expansion and enhancement of certain programs such as care at home, mobile integrated health, coach program, restorative care, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's a balancing act. It's not to play one off against another. At the end of the day, we do want to enable our seniors to be able to remain at home as long as possible. When that is no longer possible, we do need to have the facilities for them to move on to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member, Honourable Official Officer, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd hate to misrepresent the Minister in the House here, but I do need to point out that for every dollar that we spend on home care, and the Minister's just given a long list of programs that are indeed there to support home care, we spend $6 on institutional care. We know that elderly islanders, want to stay and age in place in their homes. Why are we not doing more to rebalance the funding that government is spending on elder care by supporting home care far more aggressively than we are now?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I'm sure the honourable member knows, individuals, before they can even qualify to go into a long-term care facility, are assessed by professionals. And before they go in, they would be assessed at either a level 4 or a level 5. With that, Mr. Speaker, even the programs that I have mentioned here with regard to home care, with regard to the coach program, with regard to mobile integrated health, certainly in a number of cases, even seniors, individuals who may be assessed at a level 4 would still be able to stay at home. Now, I'm not disagreeing with the honourable member with regard to additional resources to enable our seniors to stay at home even longer. But I do have to say, Mr. Speaker, that one of the priorities that we always have to look at is the safety of our seniors. And when they do hit an assessment of a level 4 or 5, we do have to look very closely at the safety and the services there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I completely agree that more needs to be spent on seniors myself to keep them at home. Senior care in Canada is subpar at best. I'm not only a senior, but also is or was an architect. Where I am from, Denmark, senior care is one of the best in the world. And one reason for this is the progressive architecture of long-term care homes and seniors' homes. Questions to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. Do you have any plans to build or renovate more homes for island seniors?
The Honourable Member for Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I agree wholeheartedly that seniors and their housing is something that we need to aspire to be #1 in Canada and right up there in the world. And Mr. Speaker, I believe we do a very good job at our seniors' homes, and I'd like to talk to the member more about that. I should say that since June 2019, we've actually opened 175 seniors units, social housing units, and there are 110 seniors units that are currently under construction, and there's many of those that will be opened by December of this year. So we are making good progress. We have a budget coming to the floor soon, and I think the member is going to be pleased with what he sees. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister. That's good news. I hope the units are really high quality. In Denmark, seniors' care is highly individualized and respects the freedoms and needs of each senior. Autonomy and dignity are just as important as medical care for healthy aging. From simply being allowed to eat at whatever time they want and being active participants in food preparation, I especially care for seniors with dementia. It's not a crime to be sick. If those seniors want to wander, don't. Please don't imprison them. Instead, provide them with a safe place to walk. Question to the same minister. Will you commit to renewing the protocols that affect autonomy and dignity of our seniors in care on PEI? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and these are all really good points that are at the root of this question. I mean, seniors need to be independent, and they need to be able to have the ability to choose when they eat and where they go, and the supports to do that. And Mr. Speaker, I know in the Department of Social Development and Housing, one of the things we look after is social housing. So these are either government-owned units or units with rent supplements that where we allow seniors to live independently. And of course, we have the independence initiative for seniors as well that we've talked about at length here, that help seniors in their own homes do the same thing. But Mr. Speaker, I'm thinking perhaps the questions that the members talking about are more addressed to community care facilities and the like. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last sitting, I brought forward a motion calling on government to provide the shingles vaccine, Shingrix, to seniors on PEI, starting with the 60 to 70-year age group. This motion passed unanimously, with the current Minister of Health speaking in favor of the motion. Question to the Minister of Health, why hasn't this happened yet?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I have to be careful how I phrase this, Mr. Speaker, so I'll just stay tuned for a relatively short time period. And I do agree completely with the member with regard to the shingles vaccine. Mr. Speaker, if I could, though, I'd like to provide some clarity with regard to the member's statement that she had made earlier. Temporary foreign workers will be eligible for the vaccine at the same time as, we'll call it the cohort, that they are working with. So if you're working in a fish plant, then you're a TFW, you will be eligible for the vaccine at the same time as the other individuals working in that fish plant. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that is certainly good to hear. I hope that that vaccine is also covered because not all temporary foreign workers have access to healthcare coverage that would cover a vaccine. Also, you may want to update your website because it says nothing about this on the PEI rollout website. It only says those who have a PEI health card. So they need to know that, but I'm glad to hear it. Going back to shingles vaccine, though, I want to highlight first, also good to hear. We're going to hear about that in short order. I hope that's very short. I do want to highlight, though, that island pharmacists who regularly provide islanders with vaccines, such as the flu vaccine, have yet to be involved in the COVID-19 rollout, and they've basically been waiting, ready to provide islanders with the shingles vaccine for months. So question to the Minister of Health, when exactly will this be provided, and why did we wait so long?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would say that staff from my department, from Health PEI, have been in continuous discussions with pharmacists, with the Pharmacists Association. There will be different pharmacies as we ramp up the vaccination process that will be providing and working with us as a great partner as we work towards having as many and all islanders that want the vaccine to have them vaccinated. Pharmacists will be a great partner on this, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well over a year ago, I brought forward concerns from my constituents about the long wait times for cataract eye surgeries here in PEI. One senior in my riding told me that she had waited well over a year for the surgery. I recently heard two other stories. One waited 10 months just to see a specialist, and then another year for the surgery. The other, a gentleman in his 80s, waited 14 months for the appointment with the specialist and then almost 13 months for the surgery. He lost his ability to drive, and unfortunately, he passed away shortly thereafter. So the last 2 years of his life was basically with blurred vision and not being able to drive and enjoy his independence in the latter years of his life. Question to the Minister of Health and Wellness. The previous minister committed to looking into these long wait times and to address them. What has your department done regarding this, and has it made any impact?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for bringing this very important matter forward. With regard to wait times in ophthalmology, Mr. Speaker, yes, I do realize that the benchmark is 16 weeks for wait time. That we have to do better. We're not hitting that benchmark, Mr. Speaker. But I would also indicate, too, that we look over the last time period, that there has been a substantial increase in demand. I do understand, or if I recall correctly, an increase in demand of about 30%. But that, Mr. Speaker, does not mean that we can't do better and that we must do better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You can absolutely do better. 16 weeks for a benchmark, and right now on your website, the current wait time is 481 days. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, wait times for cataract surgery have increased at alarming rates here on PEI since last summer. By the end of 2019, the wait time increased to over 350 days, and it's currently, as I said, at 481 days. That is more than double the Canadian average. I was told last summer by the previous minister that he would look into if an additional ophthalmology supports were available. I'd say they need to be available. Question to the same minister. While we wait for you to recruit more ophthalmologists, will you consider paying for islanders to receive the surgery off-island?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member has alluded to, looking at additional specialists on the island, I would indicate that right now that we do have 5 FTE positions for ophthalmologists, presently being filled by 6.2, some on a full-time, some on a part-time basis. 4 of those provide a full scope. With regard to the member's question, will we as a government consider other ways, such as referring individuals that require cataract surgery off of the island? Mr. Speaker, I've already spoke to staff on that matter to bring it under consideration. I will continue to have that conversation, and as we move forward, Mr. Speaker, I would be certainly very willing, happy to bring back updates to this legislature. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Premier. Premier, last fall, you announced an Economic Recovery Council. You said at the time that there were more than 1,000 submissions received by the Council. When is the last time you met with this Council, Mr. Premier?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Leader of the Third Party for the question, and in fact, we struck a council on recovery and growth, Mr. Speaker. It wasn't entirely economic, Mr. Speaker. I think the opposition, the official opposition, and our party in particular, are aware that all of these issues are interconnected, Mr. Speaker. The economy, I think the Leader of the Opposition referenced that earlier. So the individuals on the Growth and Recovery Council, Mr. Speaker, were from a cross-section of different areas across PEI, and last meeting, I believe, happened in late December, I believe, Mr. Speaker. I stand to be corrected.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Mr. Speaker, and to the Premier's comments, there's still no report from this Council, which I assume would have formed the backdrop for your own speech, which you said was a plan, not a budget. And, you know, we may be getting a budget this week, which again should have been informed by this report. So why the delay in releasing the report, or has there been one completed?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would say to the Leader of the Third Party that the throne speech, the state of the province, and the budget, Mr. Speaker, were overwhelmingly informed by the recommendations from the committee, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the third party, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, that's good to hear. Mr. Premier, one of the central concerns on the Liberal side of the House is that the lack of full, well-considered plan for economic and social recovery. We had hoped that the Council would help in this, so it's glad to hear. So maybe you could give us a little insight on the roadmap of what you're speaking about.
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, one of the commitments that I made to the members of the Growth and Recovery Council, Mr. Speaker, was that I didn't want this to be just another report that gathered dust on the shelf. I wanted this to have hard and fast blueprints to how we get things done and when, Mr. Speaker, to have some defined goals of what we're trying to achieve, Mr. Speaker. And we're in the process of completing that report so that it reflects that commitment I made to those members. I'm very, very happy to share that, and we'll do so in the legislature as soon as it is completed, Mr. Speaker. But I will be totally honest with everyone in here. The first completed draft that was put on my desk, Mr. Speaker, had the tone of just another out of the ordinary report, Mr. Speaker, and I wasn't happy with it. So until I'm happy with it, I will not be presenting it here in the legislature, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall, Meadowbanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has long professed the mantra, it's all about people. But we are seeing a pattern, especially as it comes to decisions in health care, and more specifically patient care, that is far from the case. Instead, their motto could possibly be it's about convenience. Mr. Speaker, a question to the Minister of Health. Whose decision was it to close the transitional group home on Brackley Point Road, the one that serves as an integration point, serving members of society who are on a path to transition back to the community?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to stand up because this has come to my attention, and it's for number one, first and foremost, it's in the electoral district that I represent. So perhaps that's why it came to my attention. But as I understand it, Brackley Stables was opened in 2018 as a temporary measure to bridge the gaps until the CMHC transitional housing came into place, Mr. Speaker. At that time, as the former the former treasurer, the finance minister, and the former government would know, it was placed under the care of Health PEI, Mr. Speaker, which really isn't the mandate of Health PEI. Health PEI has indicated that they would like this to move to another department. We are in the process of transitioning that to the Social Development and Housing Department, which is a better fit. The four individuals are under the jurisdiction of the public trustee, Mr. Speaker, and the public trustee has made it known to us that it would not be in the best interest of those individuals to move, and therefore they won't, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall, Meadowbanks.
I'm certainly glad, Mr. Speaker, that, so I guess what I heard from the Honourable Premier is that this place will not be closing. Well, that's awesome, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, I've had several calls on this, and this is what this government gets. You get affecting 40-some employees, Mr. Speaker. You're in the middle of the pandemic. You're making decisions in circuit breaker time. All of a sudden, in the midst of a mental health crisis. Why would the Minister of Health or the Premier, whoever wants to answer this, not put a lens on a decision regarding mental health? From now on going forward, we're in the middle of a mental health pandemic, and you guys are throwing this around like it's nothing.
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, when it was brought to my attention, we addressed it immediately, Mr. Speaker. This is a big organization, Mr. Speaker, that we run here. There are large departments, Mr. Speaker, and we can all relate in here, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, the third party who were in government for 11 years working through it, Mr. Speaker, would know that the frustration that many of us have is that some departments don't talk enough to each other, and we've been working as a government to try to knock down some of those silos, Mr. Speaker. All I can tell the honourable member is I'm sorry there's COVID. I'm sorry we have to make tough decisions during COVID to keep Islanders safe, Mr. Speaker. I feel that is my job. I can't apologize too much for keeping Islanders safe, following the direction of the public health officer, Mr. Speaker. And once I've learned of this situation, we acted promptly, Mr. Speaker. And as I said, it will be business as usual there.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall, Meadowbanks, for second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that, Premier, because there was a lot of concerns, and it's not, you know, behind every individual is a family, and I think you have to keep that in mind. And we are seeing things happen across the country. that, you know, are affecting a lot of families. You read the obituaries today, yesterday, last week, Mr. Speaker. I still don't think that we're putting enough emphasis on mental health. The pandemic, as the Honourable Premier said, has really put a lens on this issue. And I think if we all, on all sides of this House, stand up and support everything we do and put a lens on mental health, Mr. Speaker, we will have a much better place to live. No further questions.
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbank for that. I share that wholeheartedly. I know the member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke shares that, Mr. Speaker. I know each and every member in here realizes that we need to do a better job as a province delivering mental health and addiction services to all islanders, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying everything within my power to do that, to be a leader in that, Mr. Speaker. We do a wonderful job in many regards, Mr. Speaker, but there are things we need to do much better. And I really do hope that by bringing more of these individuals who provide the service across Prince Edward Island, whether they're NGOs, members of government, members of Health PEI, or so many others, that we can address some of these gaps for the short and long term. Because, Mr. Speaker, in his first question, he asked, what does "it's about people" mean? That's exactly what it means. It's about trying to help people, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Riding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is completely clear that access to mental health care and addictions is a deep worry in our province. And even more, Mr. Speaker, it is even clear that government's response has been inadequate. It began with the broken promises to start the immediate construction of a new mental health campus following the 2019 election, and the latest delay is the rollout of the mobile mental health crisis teams. During the recent State of the Province address, the Premier announced a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week single point of access for mental health and addictions. However, all we've heard since that speech have been delays and walkbacks from the Premier. A question to the Premier, will the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week in-person mental health point of access be new, standalone initiative, or is it tied to the previous announced 24-hour, 7-day-a-week phone line for mobile crisis units?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question. I think if there's one thing in the last 22 months or so that I wish I wouldn't have said, Mr. Speaker, was to politicize the construction at the new Hillsborough Hospital, Mr. Speaker. I probably on the stage got a little bit ahead of myself in terms of what I was suggesting. I think I've been around long enough to know that if you're successful in an election on one day, you don't start the next day. And I deeply regret that, Mr. Speaker, because during the journey of 22 months, I've become concerned about the politicization of the issue of mental health and addictions. And I think that there are many things that this government deservedly needs to be critiqued and criticized for, Mr. Speaker, and I believe there's lots of mistakes that we made and we will make many more in the future. But I think one of the best things that we could do to improve the mental health and addiction services and the individuals involved in it, Mr. Speaker, would be to dial down the political rhetoric on this, to not try to score political points on this. I was guilty of it in the past, and I'm deeply regretful of that comment, Mr. Speaker. But I would caution all members in this House, let's take this one off the board in terms of politics. Let's work together and try to fix it. And that was something we could all be proud of if we did it.
Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Riding.
I appreciate the Premier saying that, and we'd like to take it off the board, but we have to see the results. And we have to see the results after 2 years. And that is the problem on this side of the House, is I don't see those happening. And we need to do better. And there's other things, too. And, you know, you look at another announcement the Premier made during the address was the establishment of a new Prince Edward Island Centre for well-being, and that alone, that in the word center, and that causes confusion, and that's what we're trying to figure out. However, the following day, the Premier offered more details. He indicated the Center for Mental Well-being is not actually going to be a physical center location for Islanders to seek support. A question to the Premier, can you confirm to Islanders in this House that your newly announced Center for Mental Well-being is actually just a working group?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a good question. This is a good debate that we should be having in here, and I thank the Honourable Member for the question. The idea for the Centre of Well-being, mental health well-being, is to get people who provide this services, whether it's from the clinical perspective through health, whether it's from our many NGOs who do a much better job at delivering some of these services. And the idea of a center is to put the resources together, to bring all of these individuals together. If it has to be in a building, so be it, but it's not so much the bricks and mortar of this, but the overall delivery, and to address the gaps in the delivery of the services that we have here, Mr. Speaker. And when I have talked to groups like the Peers Alliance, like the Reach Foundation, like the Canadian Mental Health Association, and so many others, Mr. Speaker, they have long been asking for this, Mr. Speaker. We have the bones of this together that we're trying to improve upon, and I really do think this is a good opportunity for us to finally deal with the gaps in the services and to find a way to address them, Mr. Speaker. We can address them through health delivery when needed, and we can also address them through the enhanced services by our NGOs, Mr. Speaker. And I've already told them, if it takes money, Mr. Speaker, you just tell me how much it is, and I'll make it available for you.
The honourable member from Cornwall, West Worthy, your second supplementary.
And I guess we do need that, and we do need a center for well-being, and we do need a center for wellness, and we need those things, but we need it clear at the beginning so we can figure out a plan. This is 2 years in. I'm looking for a plan, and I don't want vague anymore. We have to move from stop being interested in this to a real commitment. Mr. Speaker, Islanders have been hearing the same re-announcements and delays from this government for 2 years. Mr. Speaker, when government makes promises they don't follow through on, it reduces the public's confidence in the institution of government. Question to the Premier. How are Islanders to have confidence in your government's ability to deliver mental health services when all we have gotten so far is a series of re-announcements and delays?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope their confidence can come from 22 months of just trying to do everything that can be done to make life better for the citizens we serve, Mr. Speaker, and don't try to profess, never have, that I'm an expert, that I haven't made mistakes. I've made many, Mr. Speaker. I have, over the last 9 or 10 months in particular, because it's been so highlighted during this time of COVID, I have really, dived headfirst into the file of mental health and addictions, Mr. Speaker. I met with many individuals. I don't think we need to have individuals have rallies to get the attention of government, Mr. Speaker. I think we need to do a better job of government to make sure they know that they can come to address these issues. And the Centre for Wellbeing is a perfect area for those things to happen, Mr. Speaker. I'm much more interested in tangible results than I am about the politics of any of this. Look, if I get voted out because we fixed mental health and you didn't like it, I'd be the happiest guy in the world for you, Mr. Speaker, as long as we made some steps to fix it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the throne speech had the language encouraging a greater use of electric vehicles, Mr. Speaker. A question to the Minister of Action over there, Mr. Speaker. We've been talking, as far long as I've been here, the question of rebates to electric vehicles has come up. Will the Minister of Action finally take action on this?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as we move towards our unveiling our total goals for net zero and how we plan to get there, obviously the electrification of our transportation system is going to be very, very important, whether it's the regular passenger vehicles that everybody drives every day, to the delivery trucks, to bikes, to buses. It's going to be very important that we move in that direction. So I would say, based on that, yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Royal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we're getting a few sneak peeks at the budget here, hopefully, today, and that's good news. I know I don't have to tell the Minister how important it is in his plan to get to net zero, how getting the vehicles off the road immediately is going to be important. And I was talking to someone the other day, about replacing fuel consumption vehicles with electric vehicles this year is going to be important. It's like, putting $100 away at age 20 versus putting $100 away at age 30, especially to get to our greenhouse gas emission reductions, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister know how fast we can implement these rebates whenever, if it's in the provincial budget?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I would say that in order to implement any program, we would need a month or two to kind of ramp it up and fashion what the application process would look like and put some guidelines around it. So I would think that we proved during COVID we can do that much quicker if we need to. So if there was an opportunity to do it more quickly, I think that the team that I have over there that does a lot of that policy work for me were instrumental in some of the COVID activities that I was involved with, the department at the time, and they happened to come with me in the shuffle. So I think that some of those people are quite capable of making this happen quickly. So it's a very long way to say quickly, as quick as I could possibly do it, if in any year where the opportunity was available monetarily. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Morel-Goma, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that. And I know that, you know, if this is announced in the budget, getting new electric vehicles on the lots is going to be an issue. So that's why we need the carrot and the stick. We need the rebates, but we also need the zero-emission vehicle mandate legislation to come forward as well, Mr. Speaker. One way, though, we can do it in this year with perhaps a lack of electric vehicles, unless, you know, like we get hundreds of people just go online and buy Teslas all of a sudden. One way to do it is using those rebates as well on used electric vehicles. It also allows people that can't afford, you know, brand new electric vehicles to get into the market as well. So, especially in this first year or two, Mr. Speaker, would the minister consider giving these rebates on used electric vehicles as well?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the honourable member makes some good points there. I think it's you know, for me, part of the reason that it seems like we've been dragging our feet on this file, and we really haven't. It's always been something that's been talked about. How would we do it, and how would we put it out, and how would we make it work? And one of the big issues that I always had is I don't want to be criticized for bringing in a program that only rich people can benefit from, because like a $55,000 electric vehicle, even with the most generous of rebates from the province, is still going to be a very high car payment, and so it's only going to be accessible to a certain class of people, and I don't want to do that. I mean, as we move towards net zero, everybody has to come with us, and as the Premier has talked about in this House this session, we have to be particularly concerned about the vulnerable people in our population and how the changes that we make affect them. So used cars is obviously something that we would be looking to lower the rate of. But quite honestly, I would be more in favor of focusing our energy there to make sure we got them in the hands of people who would be the most impacted by an increase in the carbon tax. But I would say that anything's on the table in any year where the monetary funds were made available. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, I've spoken with many grandparents in Summerside who, for all different reasons, are raising their grandchildren. One challenge I've been hearing about is housing. Many would be benefited from a seniors housing program, but because their grandchildren are with them even part of the month, they're not eligible for those spaces. Question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. What is the province doing to make spaces available that reflect this reality for many grandparents?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And whenever there's a situation like the member describes where, you know, the income of someone who's trying to do so much good, as you know, grandparents looking after their grandchildren do, puts them in a category where they can't receive the supports that they need. It's something that the department really has to look at carefully. It's a tricky business because you push in one spot and it pokes out the other, right? And that's the challenge whenever you're making changes to social assistance programs. So, Mr. Speaker, we're looking at this issue. We're coming up with a solution, and hopefully we can come up with something in a relatively short time frame that will work and allow the supports needed.
Summerside Wilmot, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll look forward to you bringing that back to the House, Minister, because this is a huge gap that impacts an awful lot of people. There are also grandparents who start providing care for their grandchildren after they're already in seniors housing. Question to the Minister, what is the policy for grandparents who find themselves in this situation? Are they at risk of losing the spaces in seniors housing if they take in their grandchildren?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member is probably aware, the policy of the department is we want to keep children out of our guardianship in the department as much as possible. We want to keep them with grandparents. We want to keep them with relatives. We have a kinship program. We want to make sure that they stay there in the community with people that can best look after them. So, of course, we're going to take steps to close these gaps and support people so that we can do just that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
End of question period. Statements by ministers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and the Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be just 1 second here. Here we go. It was such an interesting question period, Mr. Speaker. I was riveted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to rise today to share with all members that the province is providing a one-time $100,000 grant to PEI Ground Search and Rescue. This grant will go towards buying safety equipment, kayaks, trailers, as well as replacement vehicles for their aging fleet. Mr. Speaker, we now know that crisis situations can strike at any time, day or night, across the island. PEI Ground Search and Rescue is a nonprofit organization run entirely by volunteers, and they serve the entire island, Mr. Speaker. Their operations are 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The work these volunteers do requires modern, reliable equipment that is appropriate for all seasons and all scenarios. The last thing they should be worried about in a stressful situation is if they have the tools they need to do the job. The work that they do is so incredibly important. When there is an emergency or potential crisis situation, you can be sure that search and rescue volunteers are at the table and actually on the ground helping out. They are trained in navigation, survival, first aid, search techniques and management, tracking, and much more. When the request came forward that they needed a grant to modernize and enhance their equipment inventory, Mr. Speaker, it just made sense. It's a smart, no-nonsense investment. I'm happy that my department was able to help support the invaluable work that these islanders do. I hope all members will join me in recognizing the incredible work that ground search and rescue volunteers do for our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the worst feelings in the world is uncertainty. Uncertainty about the safety of your family or loved ones is unbearable. When someone is lost or missing, that uncertainty runs through their family, their friends, loved ones, and the entire community. Just this past year, we've seen how quickly islanders can come together in this uncertainty and fear when someone from their community is missing. I know my neighbours Twyla and Gerald Arsenault are volunteers and are ready to help at a moment's notice. An equipment trailer often parked beside my driveway, and conversations also had beside my driveway about how they could get access to some real funding. The ground search and rescue team on PEI trains individuals to be willing and able to help in these situations. Hours and hours of training and certification goes into the work they do. And the result is that we are able to remove the uncertainty from families and communities with the best available resources and knowledge. The end of the story isn't always happy, as I'm sure this Mr. Speaker can relate to, and that can take a big toll on our ground search and rescue volunteers. I hope that this government takes their mental well-being seriously so that they are cared for and can continue to provide the help that they do when they are needed. I would like to conclude by thanking each and every member of the PEI Ground Search and Rescue Team for the work that they do. This funding is incredibly well-deserved. Thank you for providing such an important and difficult service to our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm just want to stand to say this $100,000 grant is going to go a long way to enhance equipment for ground search and rescue. I'm really glad about this announcement today. The crews here in Prince Edward Island are a vital component of our public safety strategy. These men and women do their part and go above and beyond in order to keep Islanders safe. In a disaster and a time of trouble, these amazing individuals, heroes, do everything they can to support families, communities, and our province in bringing people home. I would like to congratulate these fine, upstanding individuals for their service and congratulate them for this special grant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to rise today to announce the Accessible Transportation Rebate Program from the Department of Social Development and Housing. Mr. Speaker, Islanders with a physical disability should not be at a disadvantage when it comes to accessing transportation options. People with physical disabilities require access to transportation for the same reasons anyone else does, to stay well, active, and to be an active member of their communities. That's why the Department of Social Development and Housing is providing $95,000 to the PEI Council of People with Disabilities to offer a rebate to help make vehicles more accessible for islanders with physical disabilities. So the PEI Council for People with Disabilities is dedicated to promoting the full participation and inclusion of people with disabilities in island society. And Mr. Speaker, the government shares the same mandate. Mr. Speaker, the Accessible Transportation Rebate Program will help offset the costs of transportation operators of wheelchair accessible vehicles and help to provide 24/7 wheelchair accessible service delivery. Mr. Speaker, this program not only supports our islanders with physical disabilities, but also financially supports transportation operators with purchases that can be costly. Costs that can be covered from this rebate program include both vehicle and equipment purchases and will cover 20% of costs up to $10,000. Mr. Speaker, I urge the honourable members to share the news of this new program in their constituencies and encourage transportation operators to apply to the program through the PEI Council of People with Disabilities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anytime we hear about funds that are going into the community, particularly to support groups that otherwise are experiencing some form of lack of accessibility, it's a good thing. I would like to remind the House that we have two designated non-profit organisations that provide accessible transportation in our communities. That's Transportation West and Pat and the Elephant. Pat and the Elephant not only provides transportation options across the province, but also takes people with disabilities and transportation issues to medical appointments and activities off island. They're the only company to do so. We also have Trias Transit that has a number of low-floor wheelchair accessible buses, and there have been some very clear recommendations that have been made to ensure that wheelchair accessible buses are part of our transportation solutions so that accessible transportation is available to those who actually don't have a vehicle at an affordable price point. The primary issue is that we need 24 access at any given time for people who may need service, and it needs to be affordable. People who are in very low income receive a transportation allowance. It's $25 a month. It'll cover your fare one way to the hospital with Pat and the Elephant if that's what you need. So we need to think about sort of the barrier to participation may not be access to vehicles, but maybe the cost of paying for the access as well. I really encourage the Minister to continue to look at these kind of solutions that partner with community partners who are the ones that know where the need is, and expect that this will mean that we will see some local taxi companies taking up that rebate to invest in wheelchair accessible vehicles and therefore expand the opportunity for islanders with a disability or mobility issues to be able to experience everything that all other islanders enjoy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Well, I just want to rise, Mr. Speaker, and say that, this is great to hear, $95,000 for a rebate program, 20% up to $10,000. And I'll have to look at that and make sure that that's in line and that we're moving in the right direction. That's enough, because in this area, again, as my colleague said, affordability becomes a major issue. And when I look at people that live at PE Home, and I've talked to many of them, and they can't even get to an Islanders hockey game. They have to budget for that, and it's difficult for them to do that. And the services there are maybe trying their best, but it becomes a difficult challenge. So this is a big step. I guess we'll look at the details of it, but I'm incredibly supportive of any announcement and any funding going to this, and I think it's a major problem, and hopefully this is a very good first step, and I'd like to applaud the Minister for making this announcement today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to rise today and speak about our government's commitment to continued investment and growth in rural PEI. The fabrication yard in Borden, Carlton was created in 1993 as the primary construction site of the Confederation Bridge. This site is in excess of 100 acres with the largest carrying ability jetty system in Atlantic Canada. Currently, there are no buildings on this site, and since the construction of the Confederation Bridge was completed in 1997, this land has sat dormant. Mr. Speaker, over the past several months, there has been expressed public interest in developing the fabrication yard in Borden, Carlton, and this government sees this site as an emerging and excellent opportunity for new business, job creation, and economical growth for the area, as well as having a significant potential for the island economy. As the Minister responsible for communities and rural development, in conjunction with the Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, I am pleased to announce that our government is calling on the public to submit expressions of interest for the fabrication yard. Those wishing to submit their proposal for the EOI should consider including the following information: a recommended land use site plan, contribution to the environment and the community, job creation, and economic benefits to the local community and the province. A full list of what is to include and detailed proposal information can be found on the official EOI that has been posted on the government website. Mr. Speaker, this EOI process is being administered through Finance PEI in the Department of Economic Growth and Tourism and Culture. And I'd like to thank my colleague for allowing me to move this project forward, which has the ability to significantly boost rural growth and development for our province. I look forward to furthering this project with my colleague, as well as continue to work with other departments to ensure that we fulfill our commitment to rural PEI. Mr. Speaker, I also look forward to working with our Mi'kmaq leadership about potential collaboration opportunities once the expression of interest process is completed. Mr. Speaker, this government has made substantial investment in rural PEI, including millions last year from my department alone. And I know that we will continue this for the success of rural communities across Prince Edward Island. So that being said, I am excited about the possible growth this project will bring to rural PEI, encourage all prospective proponents to apply. Mr. Speaker, the submission deadline for the EOI is April the 14th, 2021, and expressed interest parties can visit the government website for more information. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, I don't think I'm going to join in the applause, actually, because I'm not quite sure what this announcement was about. The Minister tells us the fabrication site has been sitting empty and unused and with no buildings on it for, oh my gosh, close to 20 years now. 1993 it was created. 1997, the bridge was opened and government bought the fabrication site, 150 acres, for $359,000, and it's sat there ever since. And I hear the Minister saying it's going to sit there for a little bit longer. Now, that doesn't seem like a cause for a ministerial announcement, I have to admit. The location is, of course, really spectacular. It's in a deep sea port. And I've heard over the years, and I know the Minister himself and others sitting on the government side of the House, when they were in opposition, had several ideas of how this piece of land could have been used. And of course, you drive across the bridge, it's one of the things that is most prominent when you get to Prince Edward Island. It's one of the first things you see. So I think there's tremendous potential for the island to use it in some way that would sort of announce to folks who are coming over the bridge that something special is going on here. And I know one of the suggestions was to use it as a base for solar panels. That's been talked about many, many times. I think the Minister for Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture was one of the proponents of that back in 2018. Maybe that's one of the expressions of interest we'll get. I heard other suggestions that we could take the concrete pillars and take them out into the strait and bury them and create some sort of marine environment out there for lobsters. Maybe that's another one of the EOIs that you're going to get, Minister. But I'm still sort of surprised. I know you don't get too many chances to get up on your feet and talk, Minister. So maybe this was an opportunity for you to announce really not very much at all, but I look forward to seeing. I I look forward to seeing the expressions of interest that come on, but surely the ministerial announcement should be when you choose a project to fill this empty space that's been sitting there for almost 20 years and is going to continue to sit there for a little bit longer. That's when the ministerial statement should be made, not at this point in the process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, third party House Leader.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to rain on the honourable member's parade. I'm going to give him kudos for at least his enthusiasm. But, you know, I had this file, and the honourable member has this file. It's a tough file. It really is. And I'll tell you a quick little story, but there was one day I was driving across the bridge, and I looked off to the right, and this is a true story. I picked the phone up and I phoned the Premier at the time, and I said, what can we do here? It's going to cost us almost $4 million to cut these things off at ground level, plant grass, and someone cut the grass for the next 50 years. And I said, why can't we go in and to buy ourselves some time here, let's make an investment in the town of Borden. Let's give them $750,000 to $1 million, allow them to go to a co and go to any other financial institution and see if they can up that money, maybe by 50%, and redevelop Borden. So that went through the ringer a few times, Mr. Speaker, and there was a lot of opposition in regards to a lot of people wanted those berms taken out of there. But I can tell you, there are a lot of good ideas for that area. And I've talked to the honourable member when he was in opposition and I was in government on many different things. There's outdoor cultural centres, where we seen an Italian factory that was actually decommissioned. And they walked in and they rebuilt this factory, but it was partly outside, partly inside, and it was phenomenal. They were building little units on top of the berms. So they were renting them out, like as little, suites type of thing. And then there was the container shipment storage was another because of the deep water. So there's all kinds of ideas out there. But I can tell you, the investment in Borden over the years has been phenomenal. And I would say Borden likely has, per capita, the most employees of any community in Prince Edward Island. And when you take the investments that were made by McDougall Steel, Silliker's Glass, the Box Company, Lone Oak, the new property, the beef plant, and I know...
Fox Limited?
Pardon me?
Jamie Fox Limited?
Jamie Fox Limited, Cultivate, and the mussel factory. I mean, it's phenomenal, and there's no reason why something can't happen there. So to the minister, good on you, but I thought you would really come with a proposal to say, here's what's going to happen as well, but good for you to have the enthusiasm to charge on.
End of minister's statements. Sorry. I'm sorry. Apologies. Introduction of government bills. No. Presenting and receiving petitions. Tabling of documents. Reports by committees. Introduction of government bills. Motions other than government. The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford and the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member from Summerside South Drive, that the 22nd order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carried. Order 22, an act to amend the Renewable Energy Act, Bill number 103, ordered for second reading.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, the opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Summerside South Drive, that the said bill now be read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carried. Bill number 103, an act to amend the Renewable Energy Act, read a second time.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, the opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Summerside South Drive, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the committee of the whole House, please.
House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be entitled an act to amend the Renewable Energy Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and position for Hansard, please?
Patrick Levesque, Principal Secretary, Opposition Office.
Thank you very much.
First time?
This year. Yeah, this year.
Promoter, would you like to commence with just a brief statement on the bill's intent?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. This bill, in combination with the bill to amend the Electric Power Act, is designed as an important step in modernizing our energy legislation. These bills together have two main goals. The first is to help make our electricity system fairer, in particular by lowering rates for the majority of islanders. It also aims to set the stage for the transition to clean energy by applying the clean energy targets that government and this legislature has already set to the electricity sector. Specifically, the bill will reintroduce a renewable energy portfolio standard, which was removed from the Act in 2016. This is a legal requirement for a utility to transition to 100% clean electricity by 2030. It adds a definition for energy storage facilities, allowing them to enter into net metering agreements. It removes the minimum purchase price for large capacity renewable energy generators, and it makes some minor definitional changes to facilitate the introduction of home storage and vehicle-to-grid technology.
Thank you. Honourable members, it's the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, or just open it up for general questions. Okay, the floor is now open for questions. Any questions? The Minister of Energy.
I don't have many questions. I do note with the documents you tabled the other day, I'm not convinced that they're complete, because when you start off, you talk about the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and what you said is that they do not have a position on the legislation, and they sent me the letter, and it basically, their position was that you don't bring either forward, so I think that's a pretty clear position. My understanding is that Maritime Electric isn't in favor of it. My understanding is also that the PI Federation of Agriculture is waiting for you to come back with the results of a survey you did of their members. I don't know if they're, I can't speak for any of them, but I'm not sure that they are convinced that it's complete. That said, we are in the middle of redeveloping our both acts, or blowing them up, or perhaps merging them into one. But one of the key things that we're working on, and we have a consultant working on it, is our modeling for what changes we make and how it would impact the ratepayer. So do you have modeling you can provide us that proves what you're telling the legislature is true?
Which part is true here, Minister?
Well, any of it, the rates going lower, anything that you're saying, or that the rate structure will change and benefit anyone. Do you have modeling to present that would show that that's true?
Well, this bill is the act to amend the Renewable Energy Act that we have here before us right now. So it doesn't change the rate structure, but how it would lower rates is by removing.
It does, though. Right, because you're changing the supply. What you're taking away is the price that we currently have, the price that we get paid for our energy. So it will have an impact on ratepayers.
Correct.
But do you have modeling that says what it will do?
Do I have modeling? No. There has been modeling done by Professor Swingler and Professor Hall, who have also provided commentary indicating.
Do you have that modeling?
It's in a report that they did, a study that they've released at the University of Prince Edward Island School of Sustainable Design Engineering, showing a transition to 100% renewable energy for Prince Edward Island.
Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Chair. So we're doing modeling with professionals. We'll have modeling. That's what we'll base a decision on where we're going with this rate structure. But I want to talk about a few things on it. One is this could have a significant impact on ratepayers, because you may actually increase the capital costs to build. And the reason is that if you don't have a price, if you don't have a set price, a guaranteed price, like the wind farm that we're currently trying to build in the eastern end of the island is a $60 million wind farm. So for us as a government or as a private individual to try to build something of that nature. They need some guarantee that they're going to get paid back. Otherwise, they need to build it into their capital costs, which will inadvertently end up affecting ratepayers somewhere down the road. Some of the other issues that we have is that when you talk about our renewable targets, we have. I think if you look at the grid today, which I looked at earlier today, we were pulling a significant amount of energy from the mainland because we're not producing any. Our wind farms aren't producing very much today, and we're not producing very much of our local energy. But 84% of the energy that's coming into the island today through imports is clean energy. So it's zero emitting energy. So what our goals are is to have zero emitting energy, 100% zero emitting energy on Prince Edward Island in order to reach net zero. And there's a variety of ways that could happen. I would dispute that there's a need to call it renewable energy, number one, because we're trying to hit net zero, which is zero emitting, is what we're trying to do. And we've had very high level talks at the national ministers meetings about SMRs as a solution for getting to net zero, particularly bigger jurisdictions. Alberta's talking heavily about it, Ontario's talking about it, but New Brunswick's talking about it, and I have spoke with the minister in New Brunswick, Minister Holland, about this and where we could partner. As you know, we own 15% share of Point LaPro already, so we do own nuclear energy, and their plan is to look at an idea of basically use spent rods from LaPro to power their SMRs. So that's something that we'd be very interested in. That would be zero emitting energy, but I don't think it would classify as renewable. The concern about the purchase price, so like the member from Tignish Palmer Road and the member from O'Leary and Burness have both in this house asked me in different periods about wind farms in their end of the island, and I know that there's a group of individuals up there that are very, very invested in wanting wind on their property. I'm not sure if we take away somebody's ability to make that feasible that they're going to do it. And I'm not sure that if that were the case, if we should continue to build a $50 million transmission line that we're building to the western end of the island, because if nobody could be able to put power on it because it's not a feasible option for them, then we're not going to be there either. So I don't think the mayor from Tignish would be happy here. I don't think his constituents would. I don't think those group of landowners who have been very adamant they want something to happen in their area would be very happy. And that'd be out of our control, because I don't know who could pay for their asset without having some sort of a guarantee. The PEI Energy Corporation makes about $8 million a year, and that money goes into a variety of things. That money goes back to government. So I think what you're suggesting is that through this bill we don't allow the Energy Corporation to make money. That's our net zero money. So that's the money that's going to help farmers find efficiencies in their farms. That's the money that's going to help us bring in smart meters. That's the money that's going to be used to create vehicle-to-grid technology. All of those things, that's where that money is going to come from. And if we don't have that, if that money is taken away, then we just have to, it has to come from some other source, which is going to be the taxpayers. And so I think if you're advocating for an increase in taxes, I would also be against that. So all told, my position is I would be in favor of this. The department wouldn't be in favor of it, and the Energy Corporation wouldn't be in favor of it. I understand other big players aren't in favor of it. Perhaps they weren't willing to say it publicly, but my understanding is Maritime Electric's not in favor of it. And as I said in the legislature yesterday, energy is like an elastic. If we start pulling it without knowing what the results are, you're going to get it snapped on your fingers, and that's exactly what you're setting the province up to do. And I don't want energy to become, you talk about how we've created energy poverty. Well, that's exactly what we could do if we don't bring forward, yeah, you're shaking your head, no, but you know what, if we don't bring forward actual models for what we're doing and show what they're going to do, which is what we intend to do, and I'll share them publicly, like I'll table them in the House so everybody can see them. Because I'm super scared that we're going to turn energy into the internet, and we all know how terrible that is. Where, you know, if we're gonna start shifting it around and make it so that there's not, so we don't have the capabilities to do things, and we take the capability away for people to make money, we may have no generation here. Like, we may actually go backwards, and you may put the industry completely out, and that's the last thing that we want. So I guess all told, I would say that I would be against it, and I believe it's the position of our department to be against it. That's it.
Is there a question? Would you like me to address everything that you had there, Minister?
No.
Okay, so small modular nuclear reactors aren't a technology that even exists as of yet. So we shouldn't be putting our apples in that barrel, Minister. Certainly it's something that we can consider when it's actual reality, but that's just not what reality is today. So if that's the plan, that's not a great plan.
Well, that's the plan.
Small modular nuclear reactors, where would we be transporting used nuclear fuel?
Honourable members, please, when you have the floor, speak through the chair, please.
Very good, Chair. So, Chair, small modular nuclear reactors do use spent nuclear fuel indeed, and there's great concerns with using this across Canada because it creates the requirement to transport spent nuclear fuel all across the country.
Not true. Not true.
Continue, you have the floor.
Yeah, so there's a professor that has reached out to us who is very much against small modular nuclear reactors for exactly this reason. So I would be very interested to know what information the minister has that tells him that this is not true, considering the technology doesn't yet exist. We can also go on to the guarantee for developers. Alberta just had an open 2019 had an open request for proposals for wind farms in Alberta. The cost that those developers were willing to come in and develop wind in Alberta, mind you, not Prince Edward Island, was an average of 3.7 cents per kilowatt hour, less than half of what we guarantee here in Prince Edward Island. The $8 million for the PEI Energy Corporation is the Maritime Electric brings in about double that every year. So for every $2 in profit that Maritime Electric takes, the government's taking another $1 from ratepayers. And that ties right into your next point of, well, we got to pay for our transition somehow. And it sure as heck shouldn't be on the back of ratepayers. Ratepayers include all of the people that are experiencing energy poverty right now. If you raise their rates, you're just taking food out of their mouth. You're taking medicine off their table. Our tax structure exists such that you can take from those who have. Our rate structure is set up such that you have to take from everyone equally. Can you imagine a tax system that took from the poorest the same as it takes from the wealthy? That's what you're professing, Minister. As far as industry is being kept out right now. Industry would like to come to PEI, would like to set up business.
We want them here.
Are they?
We want them here. We're in discussion.
Honourable members, the promoter has the floor. Please speak through the chair.
Informed. It's hard to have a discussion when he doesn't know.
I know. You'll have your opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anymore.
Okay, you have the floor.
Certainly. So there's many in the industry that would love to come to Prince Edward Island and set up wind farms. In fact, we have a wind farm here on PEI, a 99-megawatt wind farm in West Point. And 90 megawatts of that wind is exported to New Brunswick, not kept here on PEI. And why? Because of the minimum purchase price. Because the cost of power is too high. Maritime Electric wouldn't want to entertain buying that power. So islanders are being shielded from the true cost of renewable energy by this minimum purchase price today. And none of that money is going to the PEI Energy Corporation. They're selling it to NB Power for much less than the minimum purchase price. There's power there that people could be having today if the Maritime Electric could go to that wind farm and negotiate with them instead of being forced to pay 7 3/4 cents per kilowatt hour that the minimum purchase price requires. NB Power pays, well, if you look at their document for wind development, they tell you to expect about 5 cents per kilowatt hour to use in your modeling. They sell power wholesale to other utilities at 6.3 cents per kilowatt hour. All those are below our minimum purchase price. So there's 90 megawatts, almost double what we have right now, flowing off island, giving New Brunswick power, cheap power, instead of islanders. And the reason is because of the minimum purchase price. So if you want to talk about developers being kept out, that developer is being forced to sell to only one customer, NB Power, by the regulations that are in place. How can we reconcile that with wanting to deliver low-cost power and wanting to attract industry here to Prince Edward Island? That's just foolish.
The Honourable Premier.
In questioning here last week from the member from Cornwall Meadowbank, there was some conversation about the debt load at NB Power and the concern growing in that province and within the region about their actual sustainability because of that debt load. So in some ways, are we shielding people temporarily by keeping the price low with the rate that you talk about? The fact that they're buying it cheaper than what the price is here. Is our price the actual price of what it really costs? And is the price they're buying the energy for, which they're underwriting to keep rates lower for their residents as part of their Crown Corporation? You know, is it just delaying the inevitable, or is it, what is the real price of this? I guess in a roundabout way, what is the real price of the cost? If we're saying the minimum price is 7 cents or whatever it is that you're talking.
7 3/4.
So what is the actual price of that? If they're paying 5 cents for it and they're have an elevated $1 billion debt load, maybe they're not making the best financial decisions. And is this one of them? I guess that's 2 questions in there. Sorry.
Oh, no, it has nothing to do with their wind power purchase agreements that they're signing, Premier. It has a lot to do with the investments they've made, Point LaPro being a major one for them. So those kinds of things. Nuclear, in this example, is one of the things driving up NB Power's costs. But even if you say all other things are equal, and if the power was being sent off the island at 5 cents and bought back for 5 cents, if all that was equal, but as we know, they're going to mark it up. They're selling us a product. There's a markup on that. But even if it was equal, Mr. Premier, the transmission losses that occur sending it over to NB Power make the power even more valuable here on Prince Edward Island. So we're sending power over to New Brunswick. They're buying it. They're selling it back to us, essentially, at an inflated rate. And that's being downloaded onto ratepayers here on Prince Edward Island as well.
Chair? Could I?
Sure.
Yep. Just to add, the PI Energy Corporation in their annual reports do provide some figures about the cost to per kilowatt hour for their facilities, and so like North Cape is last year was 4.8 cents a kilowatt hour. East Point was 3.8. One of the other ones 4.4. Hermanville's 5.4. So that gives you a rough idea of what the current costs are here.
Okay. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? O'Leary and Verness.
I guess MLA that's championing the bill here. I mean, from my perspective, it's an interesting debate. I'm having a hard time kind of getting my head around this because I'm not an electrical engineer, maybe like yourself or whatever, but I'm trying to get a sense of how is this, going to benefit businesses specifically? Like, now I can see maybe you can say a business like the West Point or the West Cape Wind Farm, it might benefit them, but how does it benefit the farmer or the ratepayer or a business in Prince Edward Island in their cost of power? And what are they going to see as a difference? So maybe you can just enlighten me a little bit on this.
Certainly. Well, I mean, the obvious one is, as my colleague here pointed out, the cost of wind power is lower than the minimum purchase price. The minimum purchase price was set back in 2004 and has not changed since. The cost of wind development has gone down 70% in just the last 10 years alone. So we're being shielded from those low costs there. So any developments going forward, whether they're from the PEI Energy Corporation or whether they're a private developer, we should be able to access. Well, I mean, let's just use the numbers from the East Point, which was 3.7 cents, was it, per kilowatt hour?
I think it was, yes.
3.8 cents per kilowatt hour. We could have either a private developer, they probably want a little bit more than that so that they make a profit margin, or the PEI Energy Corporation do it on behalf of the people in a revenue neutral scenario. But there's access to half-cost renewable energy power, renewable energy. So that would when the costs of Maritime Electric go down, when they can buy less expensive power, they have to pass that on to ratepayers. They can't just keep that. That's not profit for Maritime Electric. The regulator, if they end up taking more than their 9.35% return on investment, the regulator tells them to give that back. So the next time that rates are set, the ratepayers reap the benefit of those over-earnings that Maritime Electric may have had. So Maritime Electric is not going to profit from having access to lower cost power. They have to pass that on to ratepayers. So that's the first way. The second way that it's going to help business, currently businesses pay 122% of the cost of delivering service to them. Our regulations say that has to be somewhere between 90 and 110%. So they're paying far more than their share to have the power delivered to them, our small businesses, through the general service rate class. One of the reasons that happens is because within our residential class, we have large-scale industrial farms that use millions of kilowatt hours a month and don't fit into that rate class structure. So this started from when farms used energy that were similar to a home energy consumption. And within that rate class, they've grown to very large-scale industrial operations. We have other rate classes that would suit them much better and have all the costs allocated where they should be, but they are not. And IRAC, since 2016, has been seeking to have this rectified, issuing order after order, asking Maritime Electric to rectify that situation with this cross-subsidization. So every small business on Prince Edward Island, every community hall on Prince Edward Island is paying more than their fair share for power. And one of the things that this bill, well, actually the next bill does, but in any case, we can talk about that, sets a transitional class for farmers. Because when we did consult with the PEI Federation of Agriculture and the Dairy Farmers Association, what they wanted was time to adjust. So we asked them a time frame. They said that it needed 3 to 5 years to adjust. So we put 3 years into our legislation here, which is in line with what the utility had put forward to IRAC and what the government had intervened in favor of. Another way that it's going to help business is create new business models. There's going to be opportunities for businesses here. They're going to be able to participate in offering grid services to Maritime Electric through the aggregators that are included in this legislation. What an aggregator is if you have a whole bunch of small energy storage systems or maybe a bunch of electric cars, you can have them all trading power with the grid and have them dealt with instead of 110 kilowatt systems, they can be treated as a megawatt. And that's how the utility likes to deal. So then the aggregator then goes out and deals with the utility, selling it a megawatt of capacity. Those megawatts of capacity are usually delivered by investing in peaker plants, fossil fuel plants that run maybe 2 days a year, very, very expensive power. So that's another way that it'll save people money, is the lack of requiring investment in those kinds of infrastructures. As well, we send a lot of that money over to NB Power as it is right now to offer, to rent essentially peaker plants over in New Brunswick. A lot of that money can be diverted here on to Prince Edward Island, and nothing is forcing the utility to do so. It will be up to the regulator and the utility to negotiate that, and that will end up in a lower cost service provided to Maritime Electric. Competition within the market always delivers better prices to the consumer.
O'Leary and Verness.
So that was a fairly long answer for my simple mind when it comes to energy issues, maybe. But if I sort of had a bit of an understanding that when you talked about these groups, or that an aggregator is going to try to collect a bunch of different energy developers. Now, my understanding was there's an issue around transmission, that Maritime Electric sort of had exclusivity in the transmission of power. How does this affect that? I mean, will it make it easier? Is there any tariffs that have to be paid to Maritime Electric? Because once again, these are the issues that I run into a bit with the West Cape wind farm, and some of the challenges they have in trying to get their energy to wherever the markets might be. They have to get into this transmission tariff that they pay to Maritime Electric, and they can't run their own lines. They can't, because that was an issue we were trying to look at in O'Leary to try to develop some sort of a heating system to use excess wind energy, and the transmission for trying to heat that source of water about 3 or 4 kilometers away, once again became prohibitive. So maybe you could explain how that, maybe there's an answer to this, and try to keep it as simple as terms, so maybe I can understand. I know you're an electrical engineer, and I'm not, but.
Sure thing. So the transmission of energy over the grid would not be enabled by this legislation, but it wouldn't be required for energy storage systems and aggregators as we have them defined in here. It would add it to the net metering situation where there is no transmission tariff. And when you're dealing with energy being, large amounts of energy being transmitted from one location to another, there is a cost to the utility there for certain, and they have to recover those costs. But what this would, aggregators in this case, would be a lot of distributed loads. And when the grid itself is in need of, say, a megawatt of power because the wind's not blowing at that moment, then they could discharge directly into the grid at many locations all over Prince Edward Island and just balance the load. So it's not the transmission of energy that would be occurring, it's the balancing of the load. I'm not.
Okay. So why wouldn't Maritime Electric maybe be in favor of that? It sounds like that would be an advantage to them, would it not?
Yes.
Oh.
O'Leary Inverness?
But we've had the minister responsible for the Energy Corporation said Maritime Electric is quite against this. So I guess for mine, I'm just trying to make up my mind on how to go on this, and getting two mixed answers here, and maybe the champion of the bill could explain why he would think that Maritime Electric would not be in favor.
So we did sit down and consult with Maritime Electric, and they raised some concerns, and every concern, their concern was that it has the possibility to raise rates, to force them to make investments that they might not make otherwise. And when I pressed them for what specific concerns they had, they brought up being forced to buy power. Nobody's forcing them to buy power. It's all based on the lowest cost option, so it's another option for them. When we talked about the minimum purchase price, they were very much in favor of being able to access low-cost power. They're all for the lowest cost option for the ratepayers. That's how they have to operate. The only real concern that Maritime Electric had when we spoke with them was the 2030 target itself and how constrained that time frame is. But we are kind of handcuffed to that target by the targets that this legislature has already set.
O'Leary Inverness?
Okay, so I guess once again my thinking would be, so to me Maritime Electric, this could be an advantage, but they seem to be not so much in favor of this. Now for me as a former farmer in O'Leary Inverness, my bill is with Maritime Electric, and they're the ones that I'm kind of worried about, because they're the ones that are sending me the bill. It isn't going to be some aggregator or some other group out there, or it doesn't seem like that will be in the near future. So is this something to give me pause for concern that my rates are going to go up significantly, or?
No, honourable member. The rates that the utility would not be bound to deal with an aggregator of any sort. It just gives them another option, which is, as I mentioned, when there's more competition, the cost of that product or service goes down. That's just the way things work. It gives them another option. It does not force them to purchase from an aggregator instead of any of their traditional sources.
O'Leary Inverness?
So I guess what I'm a little worried about, so if all of a sudden my bills do go up, and they go up anyway. I mean, I'm not saying that they're never going to go up or anything of that nature, but you know, and Maritime Electric is the one that sends me this bill, and they say, well, it's because of this, you approved the amendment to the Renewable Energy Act, and the champion of the bill isn't, he's not sending you any bill, so it's all talk, smoke and mirrors, whatever it might be. So, you know, it just makes me a little bit of a pause for concern, and I'll be curious to see what the Minister of Environment and Energy, you know, where they're thinking that this lies. Is it something that is going to affect my bill or my farmers in my community's bills or what have you?
Okay, I have an intervention from the Minister of Energy.
So just a couple of things that weren't true that were said there. The target is non-emitting. The target isn't renewable. So the target that we're tied to is non-emitting, so no carbon. So zero carbon by 2030. It's not renewable. So I want to number one clarify that. And to your point, it's the modeling that I asked for in the front, and it's the modeling that we're doing that we're going to be able to show the impacts to the ratepayer and make evidence-based decisions based on what it shows. So the last thing I want is to put your bill through the roof because we tweaked something and we just thought it would work. So we want to make sure that the things that we're doing are going to be impactful on the positive side. And that's what the modeling will show us. So I think modeling is really, really important. Energy isn't something that we should just be making little changes and tweaks here and say, that worked, or say, oops, your bill went up. Sorry, I didn't know your bill was going to go up. And the other thing I'd like to make note of is that while the promoter of the bill says that SMRs aren't a thing, that they don't exist, every jurisdiction in Canada is working really hard to come up with them. New Brunswick has a design. Their design plan is to have it right next to Point LaPro, which means they don't have to transport anything anywhere. Because we own part of Point LaPro, don't need to have anything at Point LaPro either. Like we could effectively build one there because we're part owners. And the technology that he talks about having these things all over the place just shooting power on doesn't exist either. So I think that's and there's only one car company who has a car that promotes vehicle-to-grid technology. And I think that, you know, the honourable member wants to talk about things that don't exist, and we'll talk about the things that don't exist, which are also the things that he's talking about.
Okay, honourable members, there was an agreement made to, or not an agreement, I guess it goes to third-party time for 3:10. So if you want to adjourn debate?
Certainly.
Okay, sure.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report progress and beg leave to sit again.
Shall it carry?
Here.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill being intituled An Act to Amend the Renewable Energy Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has made some progress and begs leave to sit again. I move the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? Whose time is it? This government? The honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, third party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call on motion number 2.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Motion number 2 has been read and debate was adjourned by the member for O'Leary and Inverness.
The honourable member from O'Leary, Inverness, third party Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and maybe I'll ask for the podium. Once again, I plan on speaking too long, but I may have to recap a few of the things that I talked about before, Mr. Speaker. You know, I guess from my perspective, Mr. Speaker, I think I talked a little bit about the fact that, you know, I'm not a gambler, but then I said I usually wind up, and I think many members in this legislature sometimes purchase 50-50 tickets when we go to events. We're somewhat obligated to try to support these organizations that are out there, Mr. Speaker, and you know, so time to time you might win something. I haven't had much success on that myself, Mr. Speaker, and usually try to hope that I never win anything in that regard. But I did buy a ticket one time on a racehorse, and the CF Willis racetrack had the fundraiser in my district, and it was selling tickets to a racehorse. The winner won a racehorse. So anyway, sure enough, geez, did I win this thing? And then I'm thinking, like, now what do I got to do? And then can I even accept the prize? Because that was going to be an issue. So I remember contacting the Conflict of Interest Commissioner and say, tell them this story. And I'm looking for some advice whether I can even accept this as something to win. So anyway, at that time he said, gee, I never had that request before. That's a new one on me. So he got back to me and he said he went through the book on the conflict of interest and said you could actually have this horse. So from my perspective, Mr. Speaker, I can say I won something. although I don't think I really won a whole lot in the end. I did learn a lot in the respect that I kind of had a curiosity, I guess, about the harness racing industry. I have a lot of constituents in my riding that participate in the harness racing industry. And so I said, maybe this is an experience. I can kind of catch on to, how the bets go at the racetrack, and being an owner of a horse, how that all unfolds. So anyway, I did get a partner to help train my horse, and eventually the horse did make it to the track, because when I won the horse, it's just like a year-old filly in this particular case. So, and she came from a farm in my district too, so that was another, enticement, I guess. So anyway, we pursued on. I got a chance to meet some wonderful people. I remember the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Premier. I got to meet her a bit there. I think the Minister of Economic Development, I seen him around the racetrack, and he had horses at the time. This was probably before he was in politics, Mr. Speaker. And anyway, I found that, it was an interesting thing. I eventually kept the horse for about 2 or 3 years. I had my ultimate goal was to win a race at the Old Home Week Carnival, Mr. Speaker. And fortunately enough, I did. We won 1 race there. The horse didn't really do much after that. We won a few races throughout her career. And eventually somebody came along and offered me some money, and I basically got my money back with a little bit more, and I said I'll sell it, and that concluded my harness racing experience. But the reason why I wanted to speak on this about the whole issue of online gambling, Mr. Speaker, comes back to this has the potential of being more competition for our harness racing industry, which I think is very important to Prince Edward Islanders. I also think it's very important to the riding of O'Leary-Inverness. I think of the Sweet Boys, Orville Willis, some of those people that have horses at the CF Willis racetrack. The economic activity that they create, Mr. Speaker, is phenomenal. And I know government has been supportive over the many years. But I've talked to some of the people in the harness racing industry, and they are concerned about that this online gambling is now another piece of competition for them. I think there's value, Mr. Speaker, in actually getting out to the tracks. I think it's a value in meeting other people, which is what I gained from the harness racing industry, Mr. Speaker. I don't think there's a lot of stimulus to a person that's just sitting behind a computer screen, just hitting a button to watch something spin, Mr. Speaker. So I certainly have concerns about that. I also have concerns that there's a lot of negative impacts that this may have on our local legions and Lions clubs. I have a couple of legions in my district, and I've talked to those legions throughout this pandemic and asked them how things are going, and it's not good, Mr. Speaker. If they didn't have the machines that they do have where they're at, they think that they probably would have to close their doors. I know both in O'Leary and Ellerslie certainly have their challenges. They're just not getting big gatherings, so this, in my opinion, will be more competition for them as well, Mr. Speaker. I'm not trying to encourage people for gambling. I understand where the government comes from, that there are online sites that are out there. You watch a hockey game, there's nothing but advertisements on the different Poker Stars and DraftKings and some of those things, and I get that. But I think before we start opening up for more competition for those sites, I think we need to really put our emphasis on seeing what are ways we can do to regulate or discourage people from participating in those particular sites, Mr. Speaker. I know the member from Morel Donis, he talked a little bit about this, and I have the same types of concerns, Mr. Speaker, on what that's going to be. And I understand it's a tough decision for governments. I was fully participant in the issues around the whole issue about cannabis sales, Mr. Speaker, and the impacts with that, and the arguments were getting the same. It's out there now, Mr. Speaker. But I also feel that, I just have a lot of concerns about people at home possibly gambling, a significant amount of their paycheck so easily in the dark of night maybe, and just hitting a button. It's too easy, too convenient, and I really get concerned about that. And so if we don't have the supports that are there for people that fall into that addiction category, Mr. Speaker, we're really chasing a dollar that's a dirty dollar, so to speak, Mr. Speaker. I know we have board members in the Atlantic Lottery Corporation from PEI You know, I was a minister, and I understand all this. I've had, during my time as a minister of the Crown, I believe we've had 3 or 4 presentations from Atlantic Corporation to go ahead with this. And I believe we turned them down. Well, we did. We turned them down every time. And, you know, when you start to know what the paybacks are on these sites or these, any form of gambling, it's like a 15% payback. There's no winning in this stuff. You know, you might get your win, you might get your quick high for the odd time that you do win, but the chances over a long period of time of coming out ahead in a gambling process is pretty remote, Mr. Speaker. So I'm, you know, somewhat mind-boggled that the government would pursue this without having, you know, more air of caution. You know, I just think that, you know, it's really like, I keep saying, it's like having an alcoholic being a bartender, Mr. Speaker. The temptations are too great. And I don't want to see the constituents of O'Leary and Inverness be overly tempted by our own people. It's one thing to be tempted by off-island places and things of that nature, out-of-country places and things of that nature, Mr. Speaker. But to do it to ourselves, I'm a little concerned about that, Mr. Speaker, and would feel there needs to be much more supports, and that's why I am supporting the motion to see that there be more supports here, Mr. Speaker. So I appreciate the legislature for its time and listening to me give my points of view, but I did feel it's important that we take into the equation the issues around our local legions, our Lions clubs, our harness racing industry, and the impacts that they are going to be faced with on this. I think it will be significant, and I just don't like where society is heading, everything behind the screen, and it's, you know, I think people need to get out and interact, and so at least if you're going to our local legion, at least if you're going to our harness racing tracks, to, you know, enjoy gambling in a responsible manner. That is a good thing, but I think if we go beyond that and make it too secretive and too much behind a screen, that's going to be a negative thing, and we need to have the supports in place before that. So with that, that's really all I had to say, Mr. Speaker. So I'll pass the floor back to you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke, and the opposition whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise in support of this motion, which I'm sure will be no surprise to anyone who has been, you know, following along in the media with my comments as well as those of my colleagues on the issue of allowing online gambling here in Prince Edward Island through the ALC. I want to highlight a couple of points in this motion that I think are important. That for government to reconsider the potential impacts their decision could have on islanders. And I really want to unpack that just a little bit as to what the expectations would be, you know, for what I would see as the expectations to really meet that goal. First of all, there were 2 reports that were commissioned through ALC. Based on what we heard in the standing committee on this topic, the Minister of Finance, as far as I know, anybody else in Cabinet, didn't actually read those reports. I think that's really surprising. I mean, we are making a very important decision here that is going to impact a lot of islanders. And the only information that I've really been able to attain on what was actually in these reports is that the reports apparently said everything will be fine, this won't cause a lot of harm, maybe some harm, but not a lot. And I don't really know what that means. I don't know how they came to that conclusion. I don't know what was done in these reports, what if they did any sort of you know, consultation with islanders. I don't think so. I haven't heard anything like that. What they've taken into consideration to make those decisions, I have no idea. And as far as I know, the Minister of Finance and Cabinet also have no idea what's in those reports. That's step 1. You read the reports. I would also like those reports to be made public as soon as possible. I understand there are some issues around the fact that ALC covers more than one province, so we have to get permission from the other provinces. I think that's a little problematic in and of itself, in that if we have research that is being commissioned by ALC that our province cannot make accessible to islanders, perhaps we need to revisit that relationship and take a look at how what mechanisms are in place that that would allow that to be possible, that critical research that has been used to make important decisions can't be accessed by islanders publicly to understand how those decisions were made. We need to take a look at that. I want to also note that these two reports are not the only information out there on online gambling and its impacts. I would expect that before any decisions are made, that there would be a review of expert research literature on this topic. I don't expect that Cabinet and the Minister of Finance will be reading every single article ever written on this topic. However, there are some really key, very recent articles that have been written that should be looked at and considered. Perhaps it would be prudent to have at least a literature review conducted so that you can read that information and look at the key reports. Really, what are the best practices across the country? What are the issues that have happened in other provinces? Because, as has been noted, yes, other provinces have engaged in online gambling and allowed that in their provinces and have benefited financially from online gambling. That's happening in other places, that's true. But it doesn't mean it's the right decision for PEI. It doesn't mean it's okay ethically in the end. And it doesn't mean that islanders are okay with our government profiting off of online gambling, which we know disproportionately impacts low-income islanders, those who are struggling with gambling addiction. We know that they are going to bear the brunt of this hardship. And it doesn't make it okay for us to do this in PEI just because other provinces have done it. And I want to just say that as a blanket statement. We as islanders can choose what we want to do, what is right for this province. We should be listening to islanders, and we don't have to follow something just because it's happening everywhere else. We need to think about this carefully. Is this right for this island? Are we okay with the ethical choice that's being made here? And it is an ethical choice. Public consultation. There's no public consultation, no opportunity for islanders to share what it is their concerns are with this, or what their experiences have been or may have been with gambling addiction. I think that it is incredibly important that when we are making this fundamental change, we need to take into consideration the views of islanders and the experience and knowledge and wisdom that comes with that. We haven't provided islanders with any opportunity for public consultation, and I'm not sure how it was decided that that was okay in this case. My caucus, along with the rest of the island, discovered that this had happened after the decision had already been made, and that is just it's unacceptable. So we really do need to see some public consultation. Most importantly, the introduction of online gambling should not be happening before we have an updated responsible gambling strategy. It is shocking that this wasn't done before we made, a significant change to the way we allow gambling on this island. So absolutely agree with that part of this motion. And again, completely surprised that didn't happen. I do want to highlight one more thing, Mr. Speaker, that I found interesting in this motion, and it was the language of home gambling. I thought that was interesting because I've not heard it phrased that way before, and I'm not sure if that was intentional or just the way that the motion sort of came together, but I think it's a really important point. That this is a different type of gambling. This is promoting and allowing new opportunities for people to gamble in their homes, in a space where they very well may be alone, where they do not have the social interaction and supports that you might see, for example, at a Legion, where we do have the VLT machines. And for those who have been into Legions before, hopefully all of us in here have been in Legions before, you know that there is also a social component to that. When you're in your home alone, there's that isolation and the risk, the additional risk that puts someone at is something we shouldn't take lightly. So I quite like this framing of this language of home gambling, and I think we do need to think of it that way. So, Mr. Speaker, that is all to say that I support this motion, and I do hope that government takes this seriously and holds off, delay. There is no, that's the other piece. I just want to say quickly, I don't understand the rush, the immediate, we need to implement this right now in the middle of a pandemic when more people are spending more time at home. Islanders are stressed. There is increased levels of anxiety, particularly financially for many Islanders. Why would we do this now? I have no idea why we need to do this right away. Take the time, make a well-informed decision. It doesn't have to be done tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support this motion. I would like to first mention when the Honourable Minister of Finance addressed the motion, I was a little bit offended that she used the word safe. I don't know how many times I lost count, but to my mind, gambling might be enjoyable. For some people, it might be entertaining and it might bring in some money for the government, but it's never safe. Your money for sure isn't safe. You could be more or less guaranteed that the money will be lost. And it isn't safe for your personality either. And just like some people might enjoy to smoke, and they might enjoy it, whether or not they're addicted to it, you can hardly say it's safe to smoke, or for that matter, safe to drink, or any one of those sins. So I think we should remove the word safe from the conversation. The second thing, I was wondering maybe we should add an amendment to the motion that that basically direct that all the revenues for this online gambling site, if it appears, all be directed towards combating gambling. I think additional funds in this area is sorely needed. And I guess the wording is quite simple. I haven't written it up, but it would go something like, it be resolved that all the funds gained from gambling be used to combat gambling. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, are you making an amendment to the motion?
I've actually never tried to make an amendment before. Yes, I was trying to make an amendment to the motion, and the amendment would sound like...
So do you have copies? Do you have it wrote up and have copies?
I have not written it up, but I could make copies.
How much time you want? 3 minutes? 5-minute recess. Okay, honourable members, we'll be speaking to the amendment. The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I move that, seconded by the member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke, to amend this motion so that after the last operative clause, we will add, and therefore be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government
So you need a seconder, right?
to ensure that all revenues from online gambling be used to treat gambling
we gotta carry
addiction.
We got to carry it.
Thank you.
Is there any other members who wish to speak to the amendment? Any other members that wish to speak to the amendment? The honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbank, third party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I fully endorse that there needs to be more spent on gambling addictions. But as a former finance minister, I find the amendment, and maybe I'm speaking on behalf of government at the time, maybe I don't know, but I would, I feel that there could be relevance to, if, for example, there was, I think we had 950 people with addictions, and yes, I certainly agree, and this is my motion, obviously, but you know, is it $20 million revenue? Is it $30 million revenue that you're going to turn around and put back into an account? I would certainly like to see this broadened to more than just addictions. I would love to see this substantially increased in addictions. But I would also like to see a portion of this money obviously go into mental health and those families that are affected by addictions on this. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell you of one individual, and the present Minister of Health has an email in that regard, maybe 2 or 3 that we exchanged on an individual that emailed me during the course of all this debate, and said that she is presently $200,000 in debt due to gambling, and basically her life to some extent has been ruined. So my feeling on this, there's more to this than gambling addiction, because there's always someone, as I said before, in mental health, there's always someone standing behind those individuals that are being affected. So I think in the clause that I have put into this motion, where it says, Legislative Assembly urge government to substantially increase the percentage of gambling profits that is reinvested into gambling addiction support programs, I think is, to me, what's strong enough in this, because the other one, I think, to some extent, unless it was defined further, doesn't necessarily do or will do what the intention of the overall motion is. So I will be voting against it.
Is there anyone else to speak to the amendment? The honourable leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would just like to add my comments to this. We all know that there could be more spent on rehabilitation and what have you, but this motion or this amendment is pretty wide-reaching. And if you said if it's 5% now and you're increasing it to 10% of revenue, because who knows what the revenue is going to be? Like, if you're going to give all the revenue back, why are we doing this? I don't mean to stand up here and speak for government, but yes, we need more money for rehabilitation. Government feels they want to push this forward, but it should be a percentage. And I know it's hard to say what the percentage would be, but I guess I just want to say that, and I will not be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Is there any other members that would like to speak to the amendment? No other members like to speak to the amendment? I'll call a question. All those in favor of the amendment say yay. Yay. All those against the amendment say nay. Nay. Honourable member, the amendment did not pass. Now we'll go back to the motion, main motion. And I exhausted my list. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to the motion? No one else would like to speak to the motion? I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Oh, sorry. Oh. You get into a groove and just, I'll call on the honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbanks to close debate.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Speaker. I
Member.
think, Mr. Speaker, we've heard some very good
Minister.
debate on this issue. You know, I think it's time to challenge government on the timing of this issue, and it's not an easy decision, as I've been on that side of the House, but I think at this time, I think this motion stands in relevance to the situation at hand, and hopefully government sees that along with the remainder of legislators here today. So I close debate.
Thank you, member. I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion, say yay.
Yay.
All those against the motion, say nay.
Nay.
Honourable member, motion has passed. The honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, third party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We call motion number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, the honourable leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to rise on a point of order. Like, you know, some of us have been here a long time, but some of us haven't been here a great long time, but a couple of years is long enough. If there's going to be amendments made to motions, you know, people should be prepared. We just lost 10 minutes of valuable time, and we don't have a lot of time. So I'd just like to bring that to the attention of this House, and you know, if people are going to amend a motion, they should have it ready. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'll take that into consideration. Honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, third party House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I call motion number 3, addressing impaired driving in Prince Edward Island.
Short carry.
The member for Tignish Palmer Road moves, seconded by the member for Charlottetown West Royalty, the following motion. Whereas more needs to be done by our community and government to bring awareness to the severity of the issue and to change the drinking and driving culture in our province. And whereas Prince Edward Island already has some of the toughest drinking and driving penalties in the country, however, the issue continues to persist. And whereas, following 5 years of relatively low rates, drinking and driving incidents in 2019 were more than double the amount in 2017. And whereas, the Standing Committee on Health and Social Development has heard from law enforcement officials indicating impaired driving rates once again grew in 2020. And whereas law enforcement themselves have acknowledged that the drinking and driving issues in Prince Edward Island are in large part due to a culture of acceptance that has spanned generations. And whereas everyone plays a part in changing attitudes, maintaining a sense of collective responsibility, and serving as caring members of the community. Therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly encourage all Islanders to do what they can in their own communities to help change drinking and driving attitudes and behaviors, which can often result in tragic consequences. Therefore be it further resolved that this Legislative Assembly urge government to explore alternative and unique strategies beyond harsher sentencing that will seek to address the root causes of drinking and driving culture in PEI.
The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, will start debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has become an annual event for me to rise in this House to rail against the dangers of drinking and driving here in our province. And every year, I'm left with the feeling that we are falling short of our goal. It seems like every day, when you open the newspaper, there's yet another headline of an individual drinking and driving. Every time I read those headlines, all I can think about are the innocent lives that were put in jeopardy. And for what, Mr. Speaker? Because one person thought they were above the law, because someone thought they were fine to drive, or because they were only going up the road, Mr. Speaker. Drinking and driving should never be the answer. And I don't sit here and pretend that I know exactly how to stop it, because I don't. I don't have all the answers, and I wish I did. But the one thing that is clear is that the current practice of fines, of jail times, and revoking licenses just isn't cutting it. Mr. Speaker, between 2017 and 2019, drinking and driving rate here in Prince Edward Island, it doubled. It doubled, Mr. Speaker. And that was the first time we've seen a spike like this in 40 years. So it broke a 40-year trend of downward. It started going back up again. So whatever is happening now, to change, we have to figure it out. We have to figure out what's happening, and we have to make a change, Mr. Speaker. You know, that spike, it's just not right. And it shows that things seem to be getting worse as time goes on, even in the face of more stringent laws and more harsher penalties. And it is for that reason that I personally believe we must make a more constructive effort to address this problem at the root cause. We must stop the practice of drinking and driving here on Prince Edward Island before it starts. And this can be done through education, it can be done through augmenting public awareness, and seeking out new and innovative ways or practices to get ahead of the problem. This is precisely why I've chosen to bring this motion forward today, Mr. Speaker. And that is why I'm not here advocating for increasing punishments and so-called deterrents, though the record shows that these deterrents are certainly falling well short of doing their job. Mr. Speaker, we need to do more to educate all islanders, not just islanders in the public school system. We need to make sure government and the proper officials are reaching as many people as possible as we attempt to combat drinking and driving here in our province. Mr. Speaker, islanders are caring and compassionate people. We've seen that over the past year in our friendly and neighborly minded, our friendly and neighboring mindful approach to combating COVID-19 pandemic. And that is, we've all seen that, Mr. Speaker. In many ways, drinking and driving deserves the same general approach as COVID-19. We must take it upon ourselves to better educate ourselves on the dangers of drinking and driving. We must also encourage all islanders to do what they can do to break the habitual drinking and driving crisis that's facing our island, Mr. Speaker. We have to plan ahead. Take a cab. Have a designated driver. Leave your keys at home. Taking these small actions can and will save lives, Mr. Speaker. And I've been preaching for the past 10 years since I've had this platform to plan ahead. And when I first got elected in 2011, I wanted to give back to my community. And one of the things that has always been an issue with me has been drinking and driving. I had not teenage boys, they were young boys at that time, who were coming into their teenage years. And one of the facets was to educate my boys that there comes a responsibility with a driver's license. So don't ever get behind the wheel if you are drinking. Don't ever get into the vehicle with someone else who's behind the wheel that may be drinking also. If you're going to go out when you're of age to drink, do so responsibly. Plan ahead. Have a designated driver. And ensure the designated drivers themselves have to make sure that they committed to these people, that they would be the designated driver. They have to follow through on that commitment and make sure that they're going to give that safe drive home to the other people who are out enjoying their evening out, Mr. Speaker. Those were two of the facets. The other one was giving back to my community, and I really absolutely love where I come from. I will brag about our community. I'm so proud of the people in our community. I want to make it safer. I want to make it safer for everyone who is on the road or who has family members on the road. It's their safety that is very important to me. I'm sure everyone in this room has heard of many incidences over the years where there's been accidents, whether it's physically hurt or took a life of someone. And that affects the families, it affects the communities, Mr. Speaker. And these are all accidents that could have been prevented by educating people, by giving people an opportunity to make choices, and we all can make choices to make our roads much safer here in Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker. Our provincial government must wear many hats. We know that. And I'm aware of how busy things are present for our elected officials and our civil servants. You know, they're really busy, especially this last year with this pandemic that was unforeseen coming. But so they're busy with that. But as I mentioned earlier, we have to attack the problem on Prince Edward Island with drinking and driving the same way we attacked COVID-19. And the government must be open to revising their approach on drinking and driving, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not pointing the finger at this government. There's governments that I've been part of in the past too. We've all had an opportunity to make change. Some of us have chose to be quiet, to be silent about it. But I think now I'm asking every member in this House to take a stand on this, to go out in their communities, and educate people on the responsibilities that come with a driver's license, and not to drink and drive. There are other choices, Mr. Speaker. As I outlined earlier, the current practices of fines, of jail time, and revoking our licenses is not working here in Prince Edward Island. And government must be willing to admit that they are coming up short, and that islanders' lives are in danger, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will adjourn debate at this time.
Second.
Seconded by the leader of the third party.
Should it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, that the sixth order of the day be now read.
Should it carry?
Order number 6, an act to amend the Planning Act, Bill number 8, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, that the said bill be read a second time.
Should it carry?
Carried. Bill number 8, an act to amend the Planning Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Should it carry? Carried. The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, the Chair of the Committee of the whole House, please.
The House is now in a committee of the whole House taking a bill to consider, sorry, start over again. The House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Planning Act. Minister, or the promoter, would you like to begin with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I'd like to report progress on this and bring it back in a later time.
Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and the chair report progress and beg to leave to sit again.
Shall it carry? I bet you he did. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the whole House having under consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Planning Act, I beg leave to report the committee has made some progress and begs leave to sit again. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth and Tourism, that the fifth order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 5, an act to amend the Jury Act, Bill number 7, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth and Tourism, that the said bill be read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 7, an act to amend the Jury Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth and Tourism, that this House do now resolve itself in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the Committee of the whole House, please.
Now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Jury Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Granted. Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and position for Hansford?
My name is Claire Henderson. I'm the Director of Family Law and Court Services with the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, and welcome. Promoter, would you like to commence with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an amendment that which we can enact, that we can collect phone numbers for members of the jury.
Thank you very much. Honourable members, it is the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause. Leader of the third party.
Mr. Chair, and no disrespect to the minister, but we can't hear over here.
Okay, Minister, but you'd have to speak into the mic so we can have it. Yeah. Could you just please read your general statement again?
This is to, so that this is an amendment that we can collect contact information such as phone numbers for jurors.
Thank you, Minister. Okay, so the bill is now open for questions. Are there any questions? Shall the bill carry?
Carried.
Thanks for paying attention, guys. Thanks for carrying it, James. I move the title.
An act to amend the Jury Act. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry? Carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry? Carry. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be habitual, an act to amend the Jury Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed the same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth and Tourism, that the 15th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 15, Provincial Court Act, Bill number 16, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth and Tourism, that the said bill be read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry. Bill number 16, Provincial Court Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth and Tourism, that this House do now resolve itself in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled Provincial Court Act. This is the a request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Granted. Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and position for Hansford?
My name is Claire Henderson. I'm the Director of Family Law and Court Services with the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much and welcome. Honourable members, is it the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, section by section, or just open for general questions? The floor is now open for general questions. Charlottetown West Royalty.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. With the changes that have occurred in the first few sections of the Act, will there be any functional change to the operation of the provincial court?
You're referring to in Part 2? This doesn't establish any change to how the provincial court currently operates. It merely modernizes the language in relation to the operation of the court and expands in the legislation to entrench in the legislation, for example, the authority of the chief judge of the court, and also allows a mechanism whereby the chief can appoint an acting chief judge in the event that the chief becomes unavailable. And so from a procedural perspective, or the operation of the court's perspective, this doesn't change anything in terms of current operations, but merely codifies some of the authority available to the court at common law.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
The changes made in this Act, would you classify them, Mr., as mostly housekeeping, or is there anything new being added with these changes?
So ultimately what this Act does is not only modernize the terminology used in the Act, the department has a priority when reviewing legislation to ensure that language is inclusive and gender neutral. But what this Act also does is entrench in the legislation processes to ensure the constitutionality of how different processes relating to the court function. And so, for example, you'll note that this Act, in Part 3, establishes a judicial appointment process. Obviously, PEI has a judicial appointment process. The members of this House recently appointed a new member to the Provincial Court. The legislation clearly sets out how that appointment process is to follow. That's important because, much like the Legislative Assembly, judges are a member of a separate branch of government, and that it's very important that the judicial branch maintains independence from the operations of government. And so this ensures that the independent process through the appointment of a committee that makes recommendations on the appointment of an appropriate jurist, that entrenches in legislation so that a member of government or a future government could not just decide, in the absence of it being entrenched in the legislation, to appoint a judge in a way that did not respect the necessary independence of the court. One of the things that's not changed in this Act is something that we would call how we remunerate judges. So there are a number of features to judicial independence. One is administrative independence. One is financial independence. It's important for public confidence in the administration of justice that it's clear that there's no financial interference with the independence of the court. And PEI is actually famous in legal circles because how judges in this country are remunerated is based on a Supreme Court of Canada decision from 1997, based on a reference up from our current Provincial Court Act. And so the Supreme Court of Canada came out and said that the process by which PEI remunerates provincial court judges is constitutional, it's independent, and it's appropriate. So that section of the Act is identical, other than some updating in terms of gender neutrality, to the existing legislation. This Act also allows for, in terms of differences from the existing Act, another mechanism for appointing judges from outside the province. Under the current Provincial Court Act, but the only ability that the province has to appoint judges from outside the province relates to bilingual judges. And, for example, during a global pandemic, in the event that there was an issue with the court, we would not, under the current Act, be positioned, if something was to happen to one of the judges, we would not be positioned to appoint a judge from out of province in a quick fashion. This Act allows an appointment of an out-of-province judge for circumstances such as conflict or unavailability. Another change in terms of this Act is from a constitutional perspective is also the establishment in Part 7 of a judicial council and a process by which complaints and concerns relating to provincial court judges are dealt with. That's another important constitutional aspect to the changes in this legislation, and something that was not well set out in the current version of the Provincial Court Act.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
That's a great overview. That's really interesting. Regarding the two non-lawyer positions on the Judicial Appointment Advisory Council, what criteria will the minister use to select these two positions?
So ultimately, the composition of the advisory committee sets out particular areas from which the appointees to the advisory committee come from. So you'll see one is a nominee of the chief judge or the chief judge themselves. One is a nominee from the Law Society of Prince Edward Island. One is a nominee from the Canadian Bar Association. The last two nominees are neither judges nor lawyers, and that's to ensure that there's a perspective that's not entrenched in the legal system.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you have all lawyers and judges, they may not necessarily have the same perspective of people that are not involved in that process. And so ultimately, the legislation allows for the minister to nominate those two individuals, with the criteria being that they be neither lawyers nor judges.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
And that's the only criteria that the minister has to follow? So it can be...
That's the only legislative criteria, yes.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
And you kind of touched on this before. In Section 19, the changes addressed appointments of out-of-province judges. Has that ever happened before?
So again, under the current Provincial Court Act, the only circumstances wherein the current Provincial Court Act permits the appointment of an out-of-province judge is for bilingual, if there's a circumstance where a bilingual judge is needed and there's not a bilingual judge on the court. So currently, none of the judges on the Provincial Court are bilingual. So we have a list of judges from other provinces in the Maritimes that are bilingual who can be called in the event that a French trial needs to happen. And so at this stage, there's never been a judge brought in from out of province for other than the bilingual circumstances, because we would not at law be permitted to bring in a judge from another province.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
In Section 26 establishes Judicial Council review complaints regarding judges. Should there be more spots for those who aren't judges?
So one of the important things to remember is that as an independent branch of government, it's important that a judicial council, in the same way you'll see the advisory committee for the nomination of judges, you see a representation from the judges, lawyers, and the public. That is also how the Judicial Council is set up. And so you'll see, again, it mirrors the process for the appointments, and also mirrors that there's representation from more than one group, because this is to be an independent committee that makes recommendations on issues relating to conduct and fitness of judges. And so that's why you'll see there's a balance, because there has to be a balance from a constitutional perspective.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
I won't take about just one more question. Section 51, which addresses illnesses that would lead to a judge's leave of absence. Can you outline some of the examples for the illnesses that this section here would include?
So, I mean, ultimately, I can't give specific examples because I'm not aware that this process has ever been engaged with. But, you know, judges, like other people, are human and subject to issues such as, you know, that we all hopefully may never face. But if a judge was to be diagnosed with cancer, if a judge was to have to be in a car accident and to have to engage in rehabilitative therapy that would prevent them from performing their duties, this allows on application the LGIC to grant a leave of absence that recognizes that there are circumstances that would mean a judge was not able at that time to perform their duties.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
I was just thinking more about, mental wellness or mental illness, and if that comes in there under a lot of stress. So I was just kind of like, where does that, how can we support them? I know they're difficult jobs.
It absolutely would contemplate that.
Yeah.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Summerside South Drive.
Section 6, in Section 6, the Act includes provisions addressing a continuing education plan for judges. In particular, it addresses professional competence in sexual assault law, as well as social awareness relating to issues of racial and gender equity and issues affecting Indigenous people. Can you speak to some of the challenges between the legislative branch and the judicial branch as they relate to education?
So as we've been talking about, the independence of the judiciary is a cornerstone of the administration of justice in Canada. It's a cornerstone of the function of our government. And so as legislators, there's always a fine line to walk between dictating to a court and a judge what education is necessary. And it is extremely important that any suggestion by the legislature or government that a judge needs to be educated be done carefully. And you'll note that the language in this particular piece of the legislation, which was an amendment that was made in, I believe it was 2018, and passed unanimously in this House, it recognizes that from an administration of justice perspective, the public has to be confident that the judges that they're appearing in front of have an understanding of the issues that are bringing people before the court. But judges also have to be free from the influence of government and from legislatures that direct them on what matters specifically they should be educated in. If you're to look back in history at the decisions that courts have had to make, often decisions made by judges are controversial. They're controversial to the public, they're controversial to the legislature. If you go back as far as 1929, this House in the last session discussed the Persons case, where a court found that women were people and able to sit in the Senate. There would have been people in legislatures across the country that wholeheartedly disagreed with that assessment, who would have thought that perhaps those judges needed education, that women were not people and that they should not be afforded the same privileges as men in terms of their ability to sit in public houses such as this one and advocate for people. In 2004, the Supreme Court of Canada made a monumentous decision recognizing the right of the LGBTQ community to get married like everybody else. And so it is extremely important when dealing with issues of judicial education that be done with sensitivity and respect. And that particular piece of the legislation is a fine balancing act.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair, so what's currently included in the continuing education plan as it stands?
You'll note that the continuing education plan is at the discretion of the chief judge. The legislation sets out what the goals of that continuing education plan are, but that's at the discretion, as it ought to be, of the chief judge of the provincial court of the province.
Summerside South Drive.
Well, that might perhaps answer my next questions as well, but do you have any sense of how the courts would develop education relating to issues of racial and gender equity, or issues affecting Indigenous people, or issues of sexual violence? Is there any process that we know of, or is it all just at the discretion of?
So across the country, for example, federally appointed judges have the Canadian Judicial Council. Provincial court judges, all of the provincial court judges across Canada are members of an association that come together and deal with those issues. It is fundamentally important that government is not involved in the development of the education or in suggesting what the appropriate, how that education should be developed. Again, that is the business of the judicial branch and not the business of government. And so I would have no knowledge other than knowing that there are education. For example, the Federation of Law Societies in Canada holds an annual conference on criminal law that deals with issues such as the impact of the Gladue decision on criminal sentencing. That's a Supreme Court of Canada decision from 1999 that gives direction on how courts are to consider Indigenous offenders that come before them in terms of the principles of sentencing. The Federation of Law Societies each year, subject to global unprecedented pandemics, holds education conferences. Judges attend those conferences. And so I would be familiar with some of what happens at those conferences, but judges also have discrete independent training sessions that are prepared by judges and for judges.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. And previously there have been suggestions that people should not be considered for judge appointments unless they have knowledge about issues of sexual violence. Do you expect that to be a practice moving forward? Is there any sort of discussion in the community?
I would expect that would be a very slippery slope to get into, to have government direct what education a judge should have on specific and discrete issues. Again, imagine back in 1929, if someone had said, I think that if somebody is going to be appointed to the highest court of the country, they should have education about the appropriate place that women should hold in homes and not at businesses or in legislatures. It would be very dangerous to suggest that government has a role in dictating at any point what education someone has that makes them fit to be a judge. Qualities, as is set out in the advisory committee process, qualities that are governed by the independent committee that's making recommendations to the minister, absolutely.
Somerset South Drive.
Sort of ties into my next question here. In Part 7, the Act also includes provisions for reviewing the judge's fitness to serve as a provincial court judge. How are these provisions different from the current practice?
To my knowledge, there's never actually been a complaint about one of the, a member of the provincial court, and so there wouldn't actually be a current process. One of the reasons why the legislation is put forward is because the current Provincial Court Act does not have a great deal of information about how that particular situation would be handled. And certainly the current Provincial Court Act would not set out to this extent a robust independent process about how that type of situation would be handled.
Somerset South Drive.
Thank you, Chair, and I think you also answered my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway to be sure. How many investigations has the Provincial Court launched into the fitness of a judge to execute their duties under the Act?
I'm not aware that there's been any.
Somerset South Drive.
Section 52 provides regulation-making powers to establish a rules committee to make rules of court subject to the approval of the Lieutenant Governor and Council. Can you clarify how the rules of the court are developed?
So this reg-making authority actually echoes a reg-making authority in the Provincial Judicature Act. The Judicature Act is the piece of legislation that supports the administration of the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal. So I can tell you by analogy that a rules committee is a committee that is appointed that consists of representation from the court, government, the Law Society, places like that, and they make recommendations about what the appropriate procedure and processes are for individuals appearing before the court. And so that, again, falls into a judicial independence issue because procedures and practices before a court fall into an area that would be referred to as judicial administration. Processes for how matters come before the court in terms of paperwork and process are entirely within the jurisdiction of the court. And so this reg-making authority allows, if there is a desire, the provincial court to establish a rules committee to develop, if they wish, rules that would govern the paper processes for the provincial court.
Somerset South Drive.
Chair, so courts have final say over their rules, is what I'm getting there.
Yes.
Who would normally be members of the Rules Committee developing the rules?
By way of analogy to the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, the Rules Committee would generally be composed of the Chief Judge of the Court, another judge, a member of the Law Society, a member of the Canadian Bar Association, and a representative of government, and a layperson. And so, ultimately, this would be at the direction of, in the event that this was to be actioned in terms of the reg-making authority, there would be consultation with the provincial court and about what the composition of the committee should be, and then the regulation would be developed.
Somerset South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. When do you expect this Act to come into force?
The Act comes into force on a day to be fixed by proclamation. And so that means there's some work to do in terms of developing regulations and transferring the regulations from the existing Provincial Court Act. We would anticipate that the Act would come into force anywhere between 9 to 12 months after in the event that the Act passes in the House.
Somerset South Drive.
That's fine, Chair. I'm good.
Any other questions? Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
Great job.
I move the title.
Provincial Court Act. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry? Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration a bill to be intituled Provincial Court Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, that the 8th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 8, Missing Persons Act, Bill number 12, ordered for second reading.
Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, that the said bill be read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill 12, Missing Persons Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, that this House do now resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, the Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, please.
This is now in Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled Missing Persons Act. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Granted. Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard?
Blair Barber, Legislative Specialist with the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much and welcome. Minister or promoter, would you like to start with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Sure. Mr. Chair, this act provides police with additional authority to conduct searches and request information in missing persons investigations.
Thank you very much. Is it the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause or just open to general questions? Open to general questions. Summerside South Drive.
Chair, did the department consult with the Information and Privacy Commissioner on this act?
Yes, we did.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. What was the feedback provided?
Just 1 second. The Information and Privacy Commissioner provided the following feedback on privacy issues. She made a suggestion to use the words reasonably necessary and appropriate rather than appropriate in Clause 8.2J. We have considered this suggestion but declined to make the suggested change as we believe that the Justice of the Peace will only consider it appropriate to issue an order if it is reasonably necessary. A suggestion was also made that subsection 4.6 of the Act was unnecessary. We decided to retain the provision in any event for greater certainty. And the Commissioner noted that she appreciated the inclusion of Section 10 that clarifies that the Act does not limit the powers of the Commissioner under the FOIP Act.
Summerside South Drive.
Chair, the Act includes regulation-making powers respecting the retention and disposal of information or records obtained under this Act. Do you have any sense what those would look like?
Just 1 second. We have not drafted the regulations at this stage, so I can't give you the details of what that would include at this stage. But what we would be doing is having something substantially similar to what exists in other jurisdictions. This act and similar types of regulations have been made in a number of jurisdictions. And I can't see that we would be too far off the mark in terms of what the PEI version of that would be.
Somerset South Drive.
Chair, what retention and disposal policies are currently in place at Island Police Departments?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Honourable member, I'm sorry, could you speak up, please?
What retention and disposal policies are currently in place at Island Police Departments?
I don't have that information here with me today. They would be subject to the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act. They'd also be subject to the Municipal Government Act. The Municipal Government Act prescribes records and retention requirements, but I don't have that specific detail with me.
Somerset South Drive.
Chair, are they harmonized across departments?
I can't speak to what the municipalities have in place for municipal police departments.
Somerset South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. And are they reviewed at any time by the department?
Again, I can't speak to the records retention and disposition requirements of municipal police departments.
Somerset South Drive.
Can the IPC review collection records under this Act?
The Information Privacy Commissioner absolutely has the authority. It comes from the FOIP legislation to make sure that the collection and disclosure of information is done in accordance with the FOIP Act. And one of those aspects would be to see if the information was lawfully collected under an enactment, this particular enactment, and whether it was disclosed in accordance with law as well.
Somerset South Drive.
Subsection 8.8 allows information and records obtained under this Act to be disclosed when an investigation into a missing person becomes a criminal investigation. For clarity, does that mean that information acquired under this Act cannot be used for an unrelated criminal investigation?
I think the member perhaps read it a little differently than it reads. It says where an investigation into a missing person becomes a criminal investigation, this section does not prevent the disclosure of information and records obtained under this Act for the purposes of the criminal investigation. So what you would need to look to is the FOIP legislation to see where information that's collected by a public body can be used for a criminal investigation.
Somerset South Drive.
When is this Act expected to be proclaimed?
We are looking at implementation likely in the summer of 2021. The reason is we have to develop the regulations we spoke to earlier in consultation with the courts, police services, and we will likely also take the regulations and ask for the Information Privacy Commissioner's feedback on any privacy issues.
Somerset South Drive.
I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Can the Information and Privacy Commissioner review the collection records of records under this Act, specifically about Section 10?
Yes, as you know, Section 10 makes it clear that her authority to review collection of records by a public body, about personal information, is protected.
Somerset South Drive.
I'm good, Chair. Thank you.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Were any of these changes requested by law enforcement?
No, actually, but we did consult with law enforcement, and they were supportive of the changes. The Missing Persons Act model actually came from a model developed by the Uniform Law Conference of Canada. And so that body was requested sometime back by the Ministers of Justice for the provinces and territories to develop a model, and many of the jurisdictions have adopted it. Missing persons legislation of this sort was also recommended by the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report. So this responds to that particular call for action.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Oh, that's. Has there been a jurisdictional scan? I know that you just told me where the Law Conference of Canada came from. Has there been a jurisdictional scan of this legislation? Are these changes consistent with other provinces' missing persons legislation?
They are absolutely consistent. Most of the jurisdictions would have looked at the model legislation developed by the Uniform Law Conference. Certain jurisdictions may have tweaked provisions here or there, but the main thrust of the legislation is consistent across the country. And I'll just note, similar legislation exists in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Nova Scotia.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Perfect. You didn't mention New Brunswick. Do they work on, are they looking at something similar?
I don't know that they're specifically looking at this particular piece. I do know that they're busy looking at a number of pieces and trying to prioritize, like we do, which legislation needs to come forward in priority.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Under Section 7, it says police will only be able to use information and record records obtained by missing person cases. What protections are in place to enforce information and records aren't improperly used by law enforcement?
We have the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. So for those police services that are within municipalities that are governed by the FOIP Act, the FOIP provisions, as they apply to regular government employees, would apply there. So you'd have the ability to go to the Information and Privacy Commissioner and get an order. Kensington does not fall under FOIP, but the Municipal Government Act has similar provisions to FOIP, and again provide remedies for breaches of confidentiality.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
That's interesting. What are the reasons for the additional powers given to law enforcement in changes to in the earlier sections?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. It's a new act. So are you asking what are we giving to law enforcement?
Yeah, like the additional powers given to law enforcement, like in the earlier to earlier sections of this. So I mean, maybe in the
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, currently, under the law that applies in PEI, if there's a reason to suspect that there's a criminal offense, the criminal code provides police with authority to do searches and request records, that sort of thing. This act really applies where there's no grounds to believe that there's a criminal matter. It's somebody is missing, and we don't know what happened. We need to find them. So Section 3 of the Act allows police to go to a judicial justice of the peace for an order to search premises, a dwelling or other premises, if there are reasonable grounds to believe that a missing person who is a minor or a vulnerable person may be in a dwelling or other premises. Section 4 deals with the records access order. So Section 4 is someone is missing, police go to a judicial justice of the peace, they get an order to obtain information held by third parties that may help to locate the person. So that could be, we have a list in here, it could be telephone records, it could be attendance information from wherever they go to school. It could be video records, so closed circuit footage from a retail outlet, let's say. So it will give them that extra tool, that extra investigative tool to be able to quickly find out or try to track where this person might be.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
That's I'm good for now, Chair. Thank you. Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Shall the bill carry? Oh, sorry, Nine Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. So just as I understand it, or I perhaps don't understand it, I just want to make sure. In an investigation to try to locate a missing person, if in that process, let's say, incriminating information was uncovered, of course was not the intention of the, what would happen in that case?
Well, this act wouldn't affect the other law that would be applicable to the procuring of evidence. So you would really need to look at the jurisprudence under the criminal law to see what they could do when they obtain evidence through a peripheral process, and whether or not they can rely on that in a criminal prosecution. I'm not a criminal practitioner, so I can't give you the exact detail, but there is significant case law around what evidence can be considered by the court in a criminal prosecution.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Okay, and I'm definitely, you know, I'm not a criminal lawyer or anything like that either, so yeah, I don't know exactly how this works, but I guess if you're trying to find a missing person and that information that would be incriminating might be useful, is there any sort of provision that would like protect, like let's say I have to share some incriminating information, well, maybe I shouldn't say me. A person has to share some incriminating information that might also incriminate them if they shared that information. Are they protected in any way in that case? Like I'm thinking, I don't know how that works.
You would, this act doesn't specifically speak to all those types of circumstances where someone might be, evidence might be obtained that would lead to a prosecution of a secondary or tertiary person. If someone was in a circumstance where they were worried about that, they could make an anonymous call. They could have another party report someone as missing. So that's there. If they're a party in control or custody of records that are being requested, they have to provide those records, and it is what it is. Those records will be produced, and police will look at those records and make the determinations they need to in the course of their duties.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
That's all.
Okay. Any other questions? Shall the bill carry?
I move the title.
Missing Persons Act, shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry? Carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry? Carry. Mr. Speaker, as chair of the committee of the whole House having under consideration a bill to be entitled Missing Persons Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing that the 10th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 10, an act to repeal the Blind Workers' Compensation Act, Bill number 14, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing that the said bill be read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry. Bill number 14, an act to repeal the Blind Workers' Compensation Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
This is now in the Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to repeal the Blind Workers' Compensation Act. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and position for answer?
Blair Barber, Legislative Specialist at the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much. And Promoter, would you like to start with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This act is being repealed because it hasn't been used in a number of years.
Thank you. Honourable members, would you, is the wish of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, or this open to general questions? Okay, are there any questions? Shall the bill carry?
Might get another one in. I move the title.
An act to repeal the Blind Workers' Compensation Act. Shall it carry?
Carried.
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Carried.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be intituled an act to repeal the Blind Workers' Compensation Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Fisheries and Communities, that the third order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 3, an act to amend the Insurance Act, Bill number 5, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Fisheries and Communities, that the said bill be read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 5, an act to amend the Insurance Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Fisheries and Communities, that this House do now resolve itself into Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, please.
Is now in a Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Insurance Act. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Please state your name and title for answered.
Blair Barber, Legislative Specialist for the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much. And Promoter, would you like to commence with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Mr. Chair, this change specifies that the advance payment of special damages applies to just car accidents.
Thank you very much. Is it the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, or just open it up for general questions?
Open it up.
Open it up for general questions. Are there any questions? Summerside South Drive.
Mr. Chair, just one question. Could you explain the general intent of this legislation?
Sure. Last session, this House passed amendments to the Insurance Act. One of the sections did not have a definition of what accident was, so we are adding a provision that clarifies it refers to automobile accidents. which is what we originally intended. This is just to clarify that.
Somerset House Drive. Any other questions? Shall it carry? Carry.
It's a good day. I move the title.
An act to amend the Insurance Act. Shall it carry? Carry.
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor in the province of Prince Edward, in the Legislative Assembly of the province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry? Carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry? Carry. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the whole House, having under consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Insurance Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill as agreed to seen without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? Honorable members? Honorable members, the hour has been called. It's been requested to extend the hour. Is that no? Honorable members, the hour has been called.
It's so much progress we got.
The honorable member from Morel, Dona, and the government house leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the member from Charlottetown Winslow, that this House adjourn until March 11th at 1 o'clock in the p.m.
Shall it carry?